Perilous Paws by Corinne Winters, Book 8 of the Kitten Witch series. For the ad-free version, or to get the rest of the series, pick up the audiobook at Corinne Winters' Cozy Mystery Bookstore by going to cutecozymystery.com. Be sure to use discount code CUTE40 to take 40% off. Chapter 1. 9 in the morning, and the sun already baked the pavement to scorching levels. A recent rain had done nothing to dispel the heat, instead cloaking the land in an oppressive humidity. Ember thought it only fitting that her morning be uncomfortable. The hot blasts of air coming through the open windows of Cedric's squad car were penance for thinking she could let her guard down. Ash, her sister, may very well have paid the ultimate price for Ember having done so. That fact weighed heavily on her mind. So far, all Ember knew for certain that a woman was dead, and it might be Ash. "I think it's this exit up ahead," Cedric said, squinting his eyes against the bright Louisiana sunshine. "No, it's the next one," Ember replied. "We have this argument every time. Country Road 16B, that's the exit we want." "Are you sure?" Cedric asked. "I don't remember having this discussion before." Ember glared at him, her pulse throbbing in her ears. How could he say such things? "Of course you don't remember. Your memories of me were stolen. Remember?" Cedric sighed and rubbed his nose. Ember knew better than trying to encourage Cedric to recall memories which simply were no longer present in his head. That was the path to madness, or even death. She simply had to accept the fact that, for the time being, her sheriff husband had only known her for a week to his recollection. Restoring his memories was high on Ember's agenda, yet dead bodies had a way of blowing one's schedule all to pieces. "I hope it's not Ash," Ember said with a sigh. "Me too. Most likely it's not. I don't recall Ash getting out this way much. There's not much out here." Ember glanced out her window as the sun-dappled trees sped past. From time to time, she could see a blacktop trail winding throughout the trees, part of an exercise trail built by the state. Everyone knew the land developers were hungry to build up Koshmar. The exercise trail was meant to encourage realtors to build homes in the area. So far, it hadn't worked, which sat well with Ember. Koshmar was a small Louisiana town, proud of its swamp folk heritage and rugged individualism. The touch of magic which seemed to spring from the very earth around them only added to its unique charm. Ember didn't want a bunch of big city slickers ruining the small town feel. Unfortunately, there were many people in town who wanted progress. Koshmar was at a crossroads: grow bigger or remain mired in the more quaint ways of the past. Ember knew which way she preferred, but at the same time didn't want to prevent her fellow denizens from being happy either. It was true most of the local businesses barely scraped enough to get by. Maybe progress was the right move? "You got quiet." Ember glanced over at her amnesiac husband and pursed her lips. "I was lost in thought, trying to distract myself from worrying about Ash." "We'll hit her place next, I promise." Ember nodded. She just hoped it wasn't to look for clues to Ash's murder. They came to the exit, tires crunching in the gravel, and Cedric turned down the lane. Katydids chirruped in the trees, seeming to pulse along with the waves of heat rising from the road. "Sure is a hot one today," Cedric said, blinking sweat out of his eyes. "Turn on the AC already," Ember said with a frown. Her gaze narrowed. "I thought women liked it warm. I was keeping it off for your sake." Ember wiped a hand down her face and heaved a heavy sigh. "Cedric, given that you have amnesia, maybe not making assumptions is a good place for us to start, huh?" "We're here," Cedric said. "I'll crank it on the ride back, all right?" Ember rolled her eyes and leaped out of the car. Her knees grew weak as she approached the group of state troopers and eyewitnesses standing around a tarp-covered form. Was it Ash underneath that blue tarp? Cedric came up behind her, placing a steadying hand on her elbow. "You've got this." He squeezed her elbow and moved on ahead of her. "Trooper Sawyer, Trooper James, have we ID'd the Vic yet?" The brown-clad troopers nodded their heads, faces shiny with sweat. "It's Rose Ditkowitz, single mom. She's been missing for a day or two." Ember almost fainted with relief. Not Ash. Then her heart swelled with pity and sadness. Rose had endured a short but tragic life. She left behind a young child, April, who'd already suffered her own unfair portion of darkness. Even if it meant Ash wasn't dead, Ember reminded herself it was not a win that Rose died. "I didn't know that was Rose's last name," Ember said numbly as she stared at the tarp. All she could see of her friend was the bottom half of her pink and silver running shoes. "I think she reverted to her maiden name or something." Trooper Sawyer grimaced, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's your jurisdiction, Sheriff. You care if me and James skedaddle?" "No, get out of this heat by all means." Cedric laughed without much mirth as he stared down at the body. "Looks like I've got a long morning ahead of me." "Rose went missing?" Ember swallowed hard. "I hate to say it, but has anyone seen her ex, Tom?" "We'll definitely want to talk to Tom." Cedric chewed the eraser of his pencil as he regarded the scene. "I know he was under the influence of a love spell at the time he killed Cassandra, but sometimes magic doesn't create something that's already there. Sometimes it—" Ember nodded. "Sometimes it just amplifies urges that are already present. I'm not saying Tom didn't do this. I am saying Rose was a shifter, and very cautious." "Do you detect magic?" Ember's brow furrowed with concentration. "Other than that innately possessed by Rose, not really. There's so much magical energy in Kashimar it kind of builds up in most people's aura. No overt magical method killed her, I can say that." "Good enough for now. We'll wait for the coroner to arrive, then we'll go check out Ash's place." Cedric put his hand on Ember's shoulder. "We're going to find her, Ember." Ember nodded, resting her hand on Cedric's and giving it a squeeze. She hoped he was right, desperately. Chapter 2. Unchained melody wafted above the rush of freon-cooled air inside the squad car. Ember's first instinct was to switch the channel, but she didn't want to have the inevitable discussion as to why. Eventually, it grew too much for her. When they crossed a rough railroad junction, Ember used her magic to change the station. "Huh." Cedric went to change the channel from the rockabilly anthem squealing from the speakers, but Ember stopped him. "It's all right, I like this song." Cedric shrugged, his hand returning to the wheel. Ember sighed in despairing relief. That song had been one of their favorites, and they'd danced to it at their wedding. Ember had lost her husband as surely as if he'd died. The man next to her was like a ghost, or hewn from an alternate reality. She knew him, remembered all their times together, but his mind was blank on all of that. As if guessing her thoughts, Cedric glanced over at Ember. "It's not easy for either of us." Ember rubbed her eye sockets with the heels of her hands. She hadn't been getting much sleep of late. She feared her dreams. "I know." "I mean, here's the thing," Cedric said. "It sounds like you were a significant portion of my life for quite some time. With my memories stolen, I feel kind of hollow, empty, like I'm not a complete person without those memories." Ember felt a stab of pity. She'd been mostly focused on her own loss. She hadn't considered the toll on Cedric. "I'm sorry. Ash and I have been doing all we can looking for your memories." "I don't see how. The witch hid them in another dimension, then made herself forget where. Even if you summoned her ghost and compelled it to tell you where, it wouldn't work." Ember glazed out at the Spanish moss hanging from the branches of the trees overhead. The heat that time of year had a cloying effect. She could imagine how hot and heavy her own limbs would feel burdened by moss. "Ash and I can use the same techniques you use investigating a crime," Ember said softly. "We interview potential eyewitnesses. The other dimensions aren't unpopulated. It's quite possible someone or something saw the Glaucus hiding your memories." "How would you even know where to start?" Ember sighed. "We don't. What Ash proposed is to go through the dimensions one by one, but that could take 20 years or more, assuming we could find time to find and investigate one per week." "Brute force and blind luck, eh?" Ember nodded. "We'd like a way to narrow down the search parameters. Possibly if we investigate the fallen house. No way, Cedric said. We all agreed nobody goes back to that place. It's cursed, fouled. I wouldn't be surprised if that hag is still around in a spectral state. We could measure which walls between dimensions are thinnest in the area. It could cut years off our search. Cedric sighed, pulling to a stop as a train trundled past on the hot iron rails. He turned to look at her, a frank light in his eyes. Ember, I may only have known you a week from my perspective, but I get the feeling you're the type of woman who does what she thinks is best, no matter what. You think I'm hard-headed? Ember cocked an eyebrow. No, well, yes, but in a good way. You'll listen to what others have to say. But once you make a decision, you see it through. I'm just asking, slow down a minute before you go back to that place. All right? Just slow down. Every minute without your memories is a minute wasted, Ember snapped. She slammed her fist down on her thigh and glared at him. It's easy for you to say slow down. I lost my husband. The man I love barely knows me. So, yes, I'm in a rush to get your memories back. Cedric swallowed, turning his gaze back on the road as the train passed and the gates raised into the air. That's fair enough. I'd hate to think this time is wasted. I enjoy your company. Ember glanced at him sharply as they entered the small downtown area. Ash rented a studio over a currently empty shop space below. They pulled up outside the building, Ember gazing intently up at the window. Everything looks quiet from here, Ember said. Could be that your sister came back home? Cedric nodded toward the building. And didn't answer my texts or call me back? If she lost her phone, she might not be able to do that. Let's not make any assumptions until we have a look around up there. Ember and Cedric walked across the sun-baked street, the hot air buffeting her hair. They used the landlord's key to open the stairwell access door, then tromped up worn, carpeted steps to the loft. I see the broken glass. Ember walked over to brown shards scattered on the floor near the kitchen area. I think this was a candy dish she'd never bothered to fill. Some signs of a struggle. Cedric gestured at an overturned chair. Sense anything magical? Ember shook her head. Ash was a witch too, and she's woven some protective and alarm wards about. One of them has been triggered, but there's no sign of what may have done so. Let's give the place the old-fashioned naked eyeball once over. Ember nodded. They divided the place up between them. Ember sat down at the writing desk near the old-school landline phone, chewing on her fingernail. Nothing. The room on her side was clean as a whistle, nothing out of the ordinary. Her gaze dropped down to the calendar atop the desk. Ash had apparently struggled with a pen which refused to write. A long scribble became a red streak when she tried an alternate pen. McReb's lead sled. Normally, Ember might have dismissed it. Since her sister had gone missing, she carefully tore it from the calendar and tucked it in her pocket. Hey, what do you make of this? Cedric approached her, heavy tread squeaking the floorboards. He handed her a small plastic disc with a skull sticker. A number on the inside seemed scratched in by hand. Ember squinted at the piece for a long moment and shook her head. Looks mass-manufactured, no apparent magical aura of its own. Any ideas what that number means? Cedric shook his head. I'll get the techie-oriented deputies on it. He looked about and tried to smile. We'll find her, Ember. Ember nodded, but she couldn't bring herself to smile back. Until Ash was safe at her side, Ember wondered if she'd be able to smile at all. She was quite tired of losing people. Chapter 3. Ember and Cedric stepped out onto the street, glancing at the shops on either side of her loft, a Chinese restaurant and a barber shop. The proprietors of both businesses lived above their places of business in a blatant violation of the zoning ordinance. Cedric never bothered to enforce the ordinance, especially since the places of business predated both his tenure as sheriff and the law itself. They spoke with Miss Cow, who was adamant that she'd heard shouting coming from Ash's apartment, followed by the sound of something breaking. I was going to call the police, but then it calmed down, Cow said, taking a drag off her cigarette. The hot, sticky wind blew the smoke into Ember's face, causing her to cough. "Do you mind?" Ember asked between coughs, gesturing at her cigarette. "Nah, I don't mind at all." Tao puffed on the cigarette again, pointedly looking at Ember. Cedric stepped between them, the smoke billowing around his chest. "Ms. Cow, you're sure it calmed down?" Like maybe it only calmed down because one of the arguing parties did something to the other. Cow shook her head, face scrunched up with incredulity. "After the crash, I heard a lot more reasonable-sounding voices. Couldn't make out what they were saying, but I'd say they worked things out. Anyway, I stopped caring about that point. I have to get up early." "Thank you for your time, Ms. Cow," Cedric said with a smile. Ember wiped her nose with a handkerchief and let out a frustrated grunt as they departed the restaurant. "The nerve of her blowing smoke in my face like that." Ms. Cow will never win the Miss Congeniality Award, but I don't think she'd lie to us either. Let's see what Louise Simmons has to say. Ms. Simmons told almost the same story. As her teenage niece swept clumps of hair into a pile on the floor, Ms. Simmons went into her tale. Either she could hear more clearly than Ms. Cow, or she had a gift for embellishment. Maybe both. "So then I could hear the fella getting all types of hot and bothered. Wouldn't shut up about whatever he was going on about and kept insisting the Ashley lady do something for him." "Do you have any idea what the argument might be about, Mrs. Simmons?" Cedric asked. "I don't have any proof, necessarily, but I'm betting the fella wanted her to do something sexually. You know, like dressing up in a starfish costume or something." Ember covered her face with her hands. Even if such an outlandish story were true, Ember didn't want the image in her mind. Just the facts, ma'am. We do enough speculating on our own." Simmons cocked an eyebrow, putting her hands on her ample hips. "Oh, sorry to bother you with my speculations, officer. I'll just tell you the facts. I'd have called the cops after I heard the glass break, but then they stopped fighting. I figure he let the starfish thing drop." Ember rolled her eyes where Ms. Simmons couldn't see her. Cedric thanked Louise for her time before he and Ember departed. Ember stared at the empty street, lips pursed in thought. "Ash's car isn't here," Ember said. "I noticed that as well." Cedric put his hands on his hips and sighed. "I'll put out an all-points bulletin. See what turns up." "Thank you." Ember looked down at the plastic skull piece in his hand. "You should head back to the station and see what you can get out of that." "Where are you going?" "Remember the last case when I followed Beulah? And her boyfriend, the alligator, almost ate you?" "Yeah, I remember." Ember scowled. "Way to focus on the wrong thing, Cedric. She had a spell I'd never seen before, one that let her sort of rewind time and watch it like a movie." "Hey now, time control magic sounds dangerous," Cedric said with a frightened expression. "It sounds dangerous because it is dangerous. Most of the time, magic is forbidden. However, I don't think Beulah's spell can affect past outcomes, only watch them on a playback loop." Cedric stroked his chin, the tendons in his muscular arms playing beneath his flesh. "I think I follow you now. You want her to run back the clock and find out what happened to your sister the night she disappeared?" "Exactly." Cedric shook his head. "Last I heard, Beulah wasn't feeling all that friendly toward any of us. She was mad about how her sister Cassandra died, and even more mad about Tom walking around instead of being in prison. He lost custody of his kid and has to report on nights and weekends to a psychiatric facility. I wouldn't call that free." "Yeah, me neither, but to Beulah's point of view, he probably hasn't been punished enough. I know we're not her favorite people in the world, but I also don't sense any traces of dark magic on her either." Ember's brow furrowed in thought. "She may not like us, but I think we can trust her. If we can convince her to help." "Yeah, if—" Cedric gestured toward the cruiser. "Hop in. I'll take you back by the house and you can get your car." Ember nodded. He always said, "the house," never home like he used to. She tried to focus on the current case, her missing sister and Rose's demise, but she kept dwelling on Cedric's missing memories. If the swamp witch had sought to throw Ember off her game, she'd certainly succeeded, even in death. Chapter 4. Kaylee insisted on accompanying Ember to the wrestling camp, The fluffy cat rode in the passenger seat, staring out the window as the sun-drenched landscape flew past. I don't remember it being this hot the same time last year, Kaylee said firmly. It's Louisiana. What do you want? Ember chuckled. I really hope Ash is all right. Me too. I wonder who she was arguing with and what they were arguing about. Ember slowed to traverse a narrow wooden bridge over a burbling creek. Who knows? The problem with Ash is she has a lot of dark witches she talks to. I wouldn't call them friends, but still, I think she'd be better served not associating with them at all. Ash is a grown woman and can choose how she lives her own life, Kaylee chided. I know. I try to hold my tongue, but it's hard. She's my sister, and I want to protect her. The fact that she might be missing now is, well, it's heartbreaking, to be honest. We'll find her, Ember. We always solve the case in the end. Ember sighed. Yes, but sometimes we pay a very high price for that victory. Callie grew silent. Neither of them had to mention Talico, the ghost ancestor of Ember's who used to frequent the Broken Broom pub. His absence was keen, sharp, and felt to the bone. I'm just worried that Ash got into trouble because she was trying to help me. Kaylee's ears twitched. Why would it be your fault? Well, she was trying to help me find Cedric's missing memories. Maybe that's why she was targeted. We don't even know if she was targeted yet. There's a reason you're not officially missing until you've been gone for 2 days. Most folks have a way of just turning up. Ash may have gone off with one of her party-happy friends is all. Ember nodded, though she wasn't convinced. Hopefully we can talk Beulah into helping us out. How come the wrestlers haven't moved on yet? Kaylee glanced about their camp. Big Tobacco lost his promoter's license for out-of-state shows. For the time being, he's stuck doing the local circuit only. Ember sighed. As if I needed for them to have another reason to be grumpy. Their boss man is dating your best friend, Kaylee said hopefully. You can leverage that for some stroke with them. I'd rather not weaponize Sage's, whatever she has going with Tobacco. I'm hoping Beulah will simply see the light of reason and agree to help based on appealing to her better nature. Look around you. She's a carny. They're all carnies. Don't be so judgmental. Carnies have a right to make a living as well as anyone. I'm more comfortable when they earn that living far away from me. The second you walk in the gate, they're trying to figure out how they can get you to spend or lose every single dime you brought in with you. So does your typical chain discount store. What's your point? They have shell games and rigged card games, Kaylee said. The discount store has the blue light special and marks up cheap Chinese goods 600% to make a profit. You can't just hate on carnies, Kaylee. Watch me. They parked at the edge of the RV park and made their way inside. Most of the wrestlers chose to sleep out the worst of the day inside their trailers. The whir of air conditioning units mingled with the cicadas as Ember and Callie strode across the dirt lane. I think that's her trailer there, Ember said. The one with the green guy painted on the side. Her shifter boyfriend, pretty clever pretending his hybrid form is a costume. Not that clever. I swear I lose IQ points the longer I'm exposed to pro wrestling. Kaylee chuckled, curling her tail around her body and settling in as Ember tried the doorbell. After a few moments, the door flung open and Beulah appeared, her eyes bloodshot and bleary, hair in disarray. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I wake you? Ember winced in sympathy. You think? Beulah shook her head and yawned. What do you want? Here to accuse me of another murder? No, and I'm sorry about last time. I really am. It was a misunderstanding. Yeah, and my sister's killer is walking around free as a bird. Just another misunderstanding, right? Ember swallowed. I'm glad you understand how important sisterhood is. You see, my sister Ash has gone missing, and I was hoping you might be able to help me find her. Beulah glared. I know my sister Cassandra dabbled in dark magic, but I don't touch the stuff. Neither do I hang around with those who do. Ember's gaze narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means Ash keeps some bad company. Sometimes that can lead to trouble. Ember sighed. Look, I know you don't like me, or my sister either, but I don't know who else to turn to. You have that spell which can look into the past and play it back. You want me to do a post-cognitive incantation for you? Beulah scowled. Why in the world would I cast anything for you? Who's at the door, Beulah? I want to see. Al's craggy face appeared in the doorway. His eyes went wide. Oh boy, a kitty cat. Beulah gasped as he shoved past her and came out of the trailer. He squatted down and petted Kaylee with gentle strokes of his massive fingers. Now this guy knows how to treat feline royalty, Kaylee quipped. You should help her, Beulah. You've been complaining about how bored you are. Beulah rolled her eyes. Oh, fine. It works best when the moon is at its zenith. We should try it then. Thanks, Beulah. I won't forget this. Beulah sighed. You realize I'm only helping you so I can get rid of you faster, right? Al, stop petting that cat and get back inside. You're making a fool of yourself. Ember and Callie strode back to her car, surprised at their easy success. Thanks, Kaylee. I owe you one. I accept payment in catfish, Kaylee said with a twitch of her tail. Chapter 5. Ember swung by the Broken Broom pub in the hopes Ash may have stopped by there. She popped into the kitchen and blew out a sigh at how well organized it was when Ash and Kate took over duties there. She felt the keen absence of Talako, though there were other spirits about. Ember didn't want to speak to any of them at that moment. She dialed down her psychic sensitivity and focused on the mundane task of making lunch for herself and Cedric. Wherever Ash had gone, she had vanished without a trace. Ember hoped Cedric's all-points bulletin would bear some fruit. Ash's car had to be somewhere. Ember made a chicken salad sandwich on a Kaiser roll, split it in half and ate half while wrapping the other for Cedric. She added a pickle in a paper sleeve and folded it up inside of an insulated container. Ember hoped Cedric had discovered something about the skull icon. Hopefully it was an actual clue and not just part of a board game left behind by a previous tenant. Ember heard a sound outside the rear entrance, the sound of flapping wings. She banished thoughts of the dark-winged glaucus from her mind and tried to remember it was Sage, her friend. She opened the rear entrance and Sage stood there, long, thin arms crossed over her chest, slightly upturned nose twitching. Have you found Ash yet? Ember shook her head. Not yet. Her car is missing, so Cedric is asking the highway patrol to keep an all-points bulletin out for it. Sage came through the threshold and embraced Ember. After a moment, Ember hugged her back. You've had just a terrible time lately, Ember. Sage squeezed Ember tightly. First, your new husband loses all his memories of you, and now your sister is missing. No, I'm trying to count my blessings these days, that's for sure, Ember said. She held Sage at arm's length. Do you eat yet? Sage smiled weakly. I could use a bite. Ember could justify dragging out the roast pork butt since she had company. She shaved bits of it off onto platters of sauerkraut, then topped it off with a horseradish sauce. Sage dug into the meal with gusto, her eyes rolling back into her head. I forgot how much I love this dish. Yeah, I need to use this pork butt up and fast. I've been running around so much lately I haven't had much time to keep the broom open. Ash was helping, Sage said with a sigh. I might as well help out too. It's not like customers are beating down the door of the general store these days. It's just that time of year, a slump. Things will get better. Will they, though? I've wondered about the people who want to develop the town. Maybe they're not wrong? It sure would be nice to splurge on Christmas decorations this year. Ember cocked an eyebrow. Growth on a municipal scale always brings in big-box brick-and-mortar store chains, Sage. You think people are going to come to the Broom for a drink when they can hit TGI Fridays and get an appetizer for $10? Or that they'll stop in your general store for a roll of duct tape when they can get 15 of them in all the colors of the rainbow at Walmart? Well, I for one am tired of scraping by, Sage said. Besides, what are you going to do? Run the Broken Broom forever? I haven't given it a lot of thought, Ember said, running a hand across her eyes. I like running the tavern. And I like running the general store. But the world changes, Ember. Are we just living in the past? That's a heck of a thing to say to someone whose husband has lost his memories. Sage gasped. Oh, I'm sorry. Ember sighed. No, don't be. I'm a little reactionary right now is all. Haven't been getting a lot of sleep. Sage swallowed hard. Any more dreams lately? Ember shook her head. Not that I remember. I'm hoping that whatever killed Rose has a mundane explanation. I'm afraid I'm spreading myself pretty thin of late, trying to put out magical fires here and there. Who else is going to do it, Meredith? They burst into laughter, though Ember's dark thoughts returned to plague her soon enough. We've made pigs out of ourselves, Sage said, looking at the prep table. Come on, we'll pack up what's left for Cedric. Sage glanced over at her. How are things with you? I mean, how are you handling living together? Ember stuffed the leftover meat into a Tupperware container, her brow furrowed in thought. We make it work as best we can. Cedric's been, sleeping in the guest bedroom. Ember paused, wiping a tear away. Sage embraced her from behind, and the two friends rocked back and forth for a time. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. Don't give up. His memories are out there somewhere, and if anyone can find them, it's Ember McNair Jameson, Master Sleuth. Ember chuckled. She parted ways with Sage and drove to the police station. She saw Cedric's patrol car parked out front, giving her hope he hadn't gotten lunch yet. Here comes my wife now, Cedric said as Ember pushed the door open. Ember sighed. He seemed so handsome in his uniform, the sun gleaming off his bronzed, toned skin. If only he could remember their love. I brought your lunch, she said, moving to deposit the bag on top of the reception desk. Thanks. Cedric cleared his throat. So the toxicology report came back on Rose. And? Ember asked. And Cedric's lips became a grim, tight line. We know what killed her. Chapter 6. Ember swept toward the desk, her brows climbing her face. The jet of air-conditioned cool blasting from the overhead vent was a welcome relief from the heat of the day, but nothing could cool her curiosity. How did Rose die? Nervous system shock from an allergic reaction, Cedric said, both citing and striking the coroner's report with his finger. Oh, that doesn't sound like foul play was involved at all, then. Ember relaxed a little. It could be that Rose's death, while tragic, had a non-sinister explanation. Maybe, maybe not. Cedric frowned as he flipped pages in the report. The thing is, the coroner couldn't identify the agent which caused her allergic reaction in the first place. Ember cocked an eyebrow. Remember that Clyde Radley fellow? Kept swelling up with hives? Yes. Turned out he was allergic to the fungus in his drywall. Exactly. Just because they can't identify the foreign substance which caused the allergic reaction doesn't mean there's something evil going on here. I'm not making any assumptions at this point. Cedric looked at her pointedly, pursing his lips. I don't suppose you'd mind examining the body? Using your magical abilities, of course? Ember looked out the window, her belly tightening. You don't have to if you don't want to. Cedric came around the desk and stood near her. No, it's a good idea. I want to do it, I knew Rose. She was a friend. I'm not sure how I feel about pawing over her dead body. Think of it this way. We're making sure that she can rest in peace. Cedric cleared his throat. Speaking of which, I don't suppose, Ember shook her head. As of yet, I haven't sensed any apparitions bearing Rose's likeness about. Either she's moved on or her apparition aspect hasn't manifested itself on this plane of existence yet. In either case, I can't consult with her departed shade for information on how she died. Sorry. Cedric nodded. Her body is in a truck out back. Ember nodded. Cedric's small station house didn't have the capacity or the ability to store bodies, so they often rented a refrigerated truck for such purposes. Ember followed Cedric through the station house and out the back door. Cedric used the keys at his belt to undo the padlock holding the truck's rear bay door shut. With a grunt and a wave of his powerful arm, Cedric sent the door retracting upward. He clambered up into the back of the truck, cool mist spilling out and becoming visible when it hit the hot air outside. Here. Cedric offered Ember a hand up. She took it, sadly remembering a time when he'd stroked that hand tenderly down her back. Cedric drew her up into the truck more quickly than Ember had expected. She wound up standing very close to him, their chests brushing. "Sorry," Ember said. "It's fine," Cedric said, his eyes flicking up and down her form. They separated, to Ember's mind, reluctantly, and moved through a plastic curtain to where Rose's body lay. Cedric unzipped the body bag. Ember prepared herself for the sight of her friend, but Rose's sightlessly staring eyes still jarred her. Ember cast a minor spell which allowed her to detect the presence of magical auras. She'd done the same at the exercise course, but this time she focused not on the outside of the body, but the inside. "I don't see anything, wait." Ember gasped. In her magically enhanced vision, she saw tiny wisps of elongated skulls frozen midstream in Rose's blood. Unless I miss my guess, Rose has been exposed to a particular type of mushroom, fairy death's head caps. "I've never heard of them." Ember frowned. "That's because they're very, very rare. They only grow in direct moonlight on hills overlooking graveyards." Cedric pursed his lips. He got out his phone and checked for graveyards in the area Rose had been found. "The nearest cemetery is 20 miles away," Cedric said. "Yeah, there's not much chance Rose would have come into contact with the death's head caps on accident, or by chance." Cedric's eyes hardened. "You mean—" Ember nodded grimly. "Most likely this was a deliberate exposure." "How?" Cedric stared at Rose's silent, still form, his breath coming in white puffs. "What did they do? Throw some spores in her face or something?" Ember shook her head. For this level of exposure, she'd have had to ingest them. Say, 2 or 3 mouthfuls. "That's a lot of poisonous mushroom to just scarf," Cedric said. "Unless it were hidden in another dish." Ember shook her head sadly. "A spell could have been used to compel her to consume the mushrooms, and the effect would have faded before I did my original detection spell." "Do you think that's what happened?" "I'm not sure what happened, I'm just thinking out loud at this point." Cedric stroked his chin. "How long does it take for the fairy's cap mushroom to—" "Fairy's death's head cap," Ember corrected. "Right. How long does it take to kill?" Ember pursed her lips. "Within 12 to 16 hours? The victim suffers no adverse effects until the toxins metabolize into their central nervous system. Then it's a pretty fast shutdown. Rose, she probably didn't suffer. Just fell over dead." "So she could have consumed the mushrooms the night before, assuming Rose went jogging in the AM as she usually did." "Yes, assuming. Since April was dropped off at daycare on time, we can assume Rose was jogging in the morning as normal." Ember and Cedric's gazes met. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" he asked. She nodded. "We need to retrace Rose's last hours alive, and we'd best do it while there's daylight left." Chapter 7. Ember scrolled through an online database of fey creatures maintained by a witch up in Maine as the squad car snaked through the bayou. As they neared the area where Rose's body had been found, she put the phone away and rubbed her eyes. "Did you find anything that might be a likely culprit?" Cedric glanced over at Ember before returning his eyes to the winding road. "Just about any fey or fairy creature can be dangerous, but they're more prevalent over in Europe." Ember looked out the window at the dense foliage blotting out the sun. The car passed into shadow, giving her the urge to shudder despite the day's heat. "I really don't want to think there's fairies mesmerizing people into scarfing down poisonous mushrooms, especially not this variety." Cedric pulled into the small parking lot of the exercise trail, his brow furrowed in thought. "From what you've said, there's a slim chance this death's fairy head." "Fairy death's head." "Right, that. There's a slim chance it's just growing by the side of the trail. Unless it had magical assistance or there's a dead body nearby, fulfilling the qualifying factors of the graveyard. Cedric shook his head. Magic is weird. Magic is metaphysical. You can't bully it or create it or destroy it. You shape it and hope your intention comes to light. Ember gestured at the two ends of the trail. One path started with an elliptical armature, the other represented the end of the exercise trail. You take the start, I'll take the finish, and we'll meet in the middle. Right. Cedric dropped to all fours. By the time he hit the ground, he'd magically shifted into his wolf form. Cedric's keen nose would be able to detect the exotic mushroom if it grew near the trail. Ember had a different method. She extracted a twisted ash wand and slipped the leather thong around her wrist. Ember spoke the words of a short incantation over the wand, empowering it to glow in the presence of Fairy Death's headcaps. Insects buzzed, birds sang in the dense woods as Ember walked along the exercise path. She knew as well as Cedric finding the mushrooms was a long shot, but the danger the fungus presented to the public couldn't be ignored. Ember tried to imagine Rose jogging along the path, trying to get her pre-pregnancy body back so she could try love again. Rose had a rough time of it, especially recently. Her husband divorced her and moved in with the dark witch Cassandra because he'd been victimized by a love potion. Then, Cassandra had urged Rose's ex-husband, Tom, to sue for custody of their daughter, April. Tom had strangled Cassandra, an act of defiance brought on by the part of his mind that knew it was ensorcelled. It was his love for April and desire to protect her that led to the murder, which explained Tom walking around a free man, though he had to report back to the mental hospital every evening. With all that had happened, Ember couldn't blame Rose for not wanting to be with Tom any longer. She'd finally gotten custody of April back, and then died. It didn't seem fair. Another family torn apart by magic. Ember feared her own family was coming apart because of magic. Cedric seemed to be adjusting all too well to being without his memory, while it tormented Ember night and day. Her wand failed to glow when she caught up with Cedric. He loped toward her in his gray wolf form, liquid in his grace and beauty. Cedric adopted his human form, face creased with query. Find anything? No. Ember shook her head. No sign of the mushroom here. Then we have to assume she got it somewhere else. Let's swing by her house and check there just in case. Ember nodded. They walked back to the car in relative silence. Ember's mind dwelled in dark places, especially with regards to April. What's wrong? Cedric asked when they reached the parking lot. Other than my husband being an amnesiac who doesn't remember me, a woman dropping dead, and her daughter all but an orphan, not a darn thing. Cedric flinched. Okay, I guess that was a stupid question. April's with a foster family right now. Ember cringed. Have they told her? Yeah, I think April's Aunt Clarice told her. Why doesn't April stay with her aunt instead of foster care? Aunt Clarice is in assisted living, no way she can take care of a kid. Ember felt despair well up in her chest as they entered the squad car. Poor April. The universe hasn't been very kind to her. They drove to Rose's home, a modest ranch style with a well-maintained garden in both the front and backyard. Cedric and Ember checked around for the poisonous mushrooms but met with no success. Ember found something in the mail slot, however. What do you make of this? She handed him the card. Cedric squinted at it. Is this like a survey? Ember nodded. Sent by Obercorp, asking what the Koshery Homeowners Association thought of their presentation. The only way Rose would have been mailed one of these was if she was at that meeting, Cedric said. Exactly. Maybe someone at the presentation could have poisoned Rose. It's worth checking out. I don't get why anyone would want to hurt her, though. Ember chewed her lower lip. Hasn't that real estate guy, Olbermann? I think that's it. Hasn't he been trying to get the homeowners on the south side to sell their property for ages now? Cedric nodded. He wants to build a golf course, I think. Golf courses are big money. You think Olbermann got greedy enough to turn to murder? Cedric's jaw set hard. His silence was a grim affirmation of the possibility. Chapter 8. Ember finagled a bag filled with chicken thighs suspended in creamy buttermilk out of the refrigerator. Behind her, Cedric grated carrots into a large salad bowl. The whisking sound, combined with his nearness, reminded Ember of happier times. Namely, times when Cedric had his memory. "Do we have any cauliflower left?" Ember asked, turning a glance over her shoulder. "Cauliflower? But we're having a salad." Cedric frowned. Ember sighed. "We've had this conversation before. You just don't remember it. You were skeptical the first time you had cauliflower in a salad too, but once you tried it, you loved it." Cedric rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You know, I do recall having cauliflower in a salad and that I liked it, but don't try to force yourself to remember I was there. It's only going to cause you pain." "It's frustrating," he said, brow furrowed with thought. "I'm sure it is. Imagine what it's like for me every time I have to remind you of something we've already discussed." Cedric sliced cucumber for the salad, his broad shoulders heaving a heavy sigh. "I know it's worse for you. I'm trying to make it easier on you, all right?" Ember plopped the bag of chicken on the counter and extracted a colander from the dish drainer. "It's easier for you because, unlike me, you didn't lose your spouse." "You didn't lose me, I'm right here," Cedric said, adding the sliced cucumbers to the salad. "Big talk for a man who sleeps in the guest bedroom." Ember regretted the words as soon as she said them. She tumbled the chicken breasts into the colander, the thick buttermilk filming on the bottom of the sink. Cedric set his knife down and came over to her side. "I'm only trying to... come on, Ember. From my point of view, we met last week. I don't just jump into bed with women I've only just met. I'm your wife." "I don't remember that." Cedric threw up his hands and stalked across the kitchen floor. He stared out at their backyard and rested his forehead against the glass. "I'm sorry. I just don't remember." Ember tumbled the drained chicken into a mixing bowl and tossed it with spice. She tried not to allow her frustration to carry over into her movements. "I know you can't remember, but things are what they are. It's just, I didn't take my wedding vows to sleep in a room down the hall from my husband." "And I don't remember taking those same vows," Cedric said. "I'm just trying to do things right and proper, Ember." "Right and proper?" Ember laughed, though without much mirth. "Right and proper, like a good Southern gentleman, right? Except you're a wolf shifter, I'm a witch, and magic keeps sticking its nose into our day-to-day lives. Right and proper kind of lose their meaning in this circumstance, don't you think?" Cedric turned on his heel. "What do you want me to say, Ember?" "I don't want you to say anything. I want you to stop making this harder than it has to be with your modesty." "Modesty?" "You know what I mean." Ember put her hands on her hips. "We've slept together before. Many times, in fact. Acting like a bashful boy infuriates me, even though I know it shouldn't. You have your reasons, and they're valid ones. I still can't help the way I feel any more than you can't help your amnesia." Cedric came back to the kitchen and resumed his task of slicing the cucumber. "I know. There are no manuals written on this kind of thing." Ember frowned. "Don't be too sure. Sometimes, in the case of traumatic brain injury, people lose their memories in a similar fashion to your own. Maybe we should study those cases. Those cases are predicated on the fact that the memories are still there, somewhere, locked inside of a person's head." Cedric sighed, but looked her in the eye with a stalwart gaze. "I'm willing to try anything to make this easier, for both of us." Ember gave him a small smile. "Thanks. I appreciate that." A knock came at their door. Cedric glanced over at the entrance. His eyes narrowed. "Were we expecting someone?" "I don't know. Maybe?" Ember shook her head. "It could be Beulah, but I assumed that she would meet us at Ash's place later this evening." Cedric went toward the door, peering through the filmy curtains. "It is Beulah. I guess she's here early." Cedric opened the door and Beulah eyed them with a narrowed glare. Sheriff. Nice of you to help out, Beulah, Cedric said. Beulah's lips twitched a sneer. I'm doing it for your wife's sister, not you. Things are hard for witches. We need to stick together. Fair enough. Cedric gestured at the kitchen. Would you like to join us for dinner? We're having grilled chicken salad. Beulah cocked an eyebrow. I could eat. Ember glanced over at Beulah. She wore a midnight black dress with a translucent lace blouse. Ember thought perhaps she was trying to channel Stevie Nicks with a little bit of hipster vibe. The leather satchel in her hand appeared heavy. Glass clinked when Beulah set it down on the floor near the border between kitchen and living area. It was a strange dinner with Ember and Cedric's amnesia-born turmoil, and Beulah's reservations about both of them leading to a lot of stoic silence. Cedric made several attempts at small talk, but no one seemed willing to take the bait. As the sun sank below the horizon and night reigned on the land, Beulah abruptly stood up and pushed in her chair. I need to make some preparations. Can I use your back porch? Some of the incense is kind of fragrant. Of course. Ember gestured at the back door. Do you need any help? You've done quite enough for one lifetime, don't you think? Beulah shut the door firmly behind her. Ember and Cedric exchanged glances. If Beulah were this hostile, how would the spell casting that evening go? Could they really trust the carnival witch whose sister had fallen under the spell of black magic? Chapter 9. The crescent moon peered out from behind a thin skein of clouds. A scraggly tree in Ash's laughably small backyard spread its branches over the yellow moon, like skeletal fingers grasping at the light. Ember felt the tingle of magic in the air as the moon neared its zenith. The witching hour, so it was called. When magic was at its strongest, but the bonds between dimensions were at their weakest. Nearby, Beulah drew her chalk pattern on the sidewalk, chanting under her breath all the while. Time was the fourth dimension, according to Beulah. The witching hour should weaken the barriers between past and present, making her spell easier. Kaylee looked on with interest as Cedric paced nervously. What's his problem? He's worried that someone will see Beulah casting her spell and have a hissy cow, Ember replied, stroking Kaylee's fur. From what I saw before, those without magical vision will just see two crazy ladies drawing on the sidewalk with chalk and talking to themselves. Cedric's been around plenty of magic before. Why should this cause him the slightest problem? I was involved in the casting of most of that magic. He can't remember me, so therefore he can't remember the magic directly. The glaucus really did a number on his poor brain. Hey, I think Beulah is ready to begin. Ember turned her gaze on the black-clad witch. Beulah held her hand out over the circle design she'd sketched on the sidewalk and chanted. The circle lit up with sorcerous energy, prompting Ember's heartbeat to rise in tempo. Now she'll dial the clock backwards and we'll get to see what happened the night of Ash's disappearance. Beulah swept her arms in a circle above the design, mimicking the motions of turning clock hands backward. She suddenly paused, then clapped her hands together. Is it working? Kaylee asked. Oh no, Ember said. It's working, but Ash wasn't outside during her altercation. She was inside, Cedric finished. Go on, check it out. I'll stay out here and monitor Beulah while she concentrates on maintaining the spell. Beulah's brow glistened with sweat, her closed eyes twitching with the strain of keeping the enchantment going. I'd hurry, Cedric said. Ember was already on her way up the steps, rushing to Ash's loft apartment. She saw ghostly, translucent images of Ash, and a man Ember didn't immediately recognize. Ash was gathering together a collection of unguents and tinctures in a black medicine bag. The man followed her around, neither his speech nor his behavior hostile. Thanks for helping. I don't know where else to turn. Ember gasped. That voice was Tom, April's biological father and the man who had strangled Cassandra. Even though Ember thought Tom was a victim of circumstance, there still remained the fact he'd killed a woman. That made her view him with some degree of trepidation. Ash didn't seem bothered. April's a good kid who's been through a lot. Just because she's drawing pictures and speaking in weird voices doesn't mean she's possessed. Tom's past effigy shook its translucent head. It's hard to convey what it's like when the entity takes control. It's like I'm not looking into my daughter's eyes anymore. There's an intelligence and an age there. Ash cocked an eyebrow. Careful. The more you discuss a supernatural entity, the stronger it gets. Ember frowned. That was generally true, but only because some entities siphoned off the latent psychic energies of their haunting victims. Ash didn't want Tom speculating. Or maybe she was tired of the sound of his voice. I wasn't sure where to go. Most people in town won't even talk to me. You killed someone, Tom. Ash sighed. She was a bad person, but you still killed her. I was her prisoner. She kept me hypnotized by her love spell. Which is why you're not in prison or on death row. Now calm down. Ash looked around worriedly. You're not the only one dealing with... Tom cried out, his hands going to the sides of his face. A twisted, strangled howl erupted from his froth-flecked lips. Oh, great, Ash said with a sigh. She grabbed a vial of liquid and flung some at Tom. I bid thee flee this mortal vessel and return to the realm beyond. The banishment charm didn't work. Whatever possessed Tom proved too strong. Tom staggered forward and grabbed Ash by the shirt. He flung her across the kitchen counter, dislodging the candy dish with her body. Ash hit the floor at the same time as the dish. She cut her palm on the spilled glass but paid it no heed. Arcane words spilled from Ash's lips as she tried a more powerful banishing spell. Tom fell to his knees, a keening moan erupting from his throat. He fell face down on the floor and shivered. Tom? You back in control of yourself? Tom lifted his head and looked up at Ash. I think so. What was that? Don't talk about it or it may come back. Come on, let's go take a look at your daughter. Ash and Tom's effigies moved down the stairs to the street. Ember followed, watching the two of them get into Ash's truck. Beulah let go of the spell and the translucent shadow play ended. She slumped against the brick wall behind her, sighing in relief. Thank you, Beulah, Ember said. I owe you one. Yeah, you do. And I'll collect at some point, don't doubt that. Beulah stood up and walked away. I hope you find your sister, Ember. But you'll excuse me if I don't feel much like hanging out with the lawman who lets my sister's killer walk around loose. Ember sighed, unable or perhaps unwilling to explain, again, that the court system was responsible for Tom's freedom, and not her sheriff husband. Cedric put his hands on his hips and stared at the space where Ash's car had been parked. Tom again. He seems to get involved in an awful lot of shenanigans. He's not the swiftest bulb in the box and therefore susceptible to magic more than most. I think it's time we had a chat with Tom, Cedric said. Agreed. As far as we can tell. Ember stared off down the street, the direction the time effigies had taken before the spell faded. Tom was one of the last people to see Ash before she vanished. Chapter 10. Thicker clouds smothered the moon as Cedric drove them along the winding roads to Tom's shack in the swamp. I thought Tom had to spend his nights and weekends in the mental health facility. Budget cuts means they need the bed. They released Tom, but he has an ankle monitor. He's supposed to be home whenever he's not looking for work or engaging in supervised visits with his daughter. Then how was he able to get out to see Ash the other night? Good question. Cedric's eyes narrowed. I'm not real wild with Tom living way out on the edge of town like this. He's supposed to be where he can be supervised if necessary. Do you really think Tom's a killer? I mean, Ember sighed. I know he killed Cassandra, but that was because of her love enchantment, right? Fighting against her love enchantment may have been the catalyst which set him on that pattern of behavior, but I'm not sure we can lay the blame squarely at Cassandra's feet for her own demise. Ember frowned. Explain that, please. Cedric slowed as they passed through a dip in the gravel road. I'm not trying to say Tom's a bad person, I'm really not. But he could have done a lot of things to protect April from Cassandra. Leaving comes to mind right away. Instead, he chose to strangle her with a wire and then fake her death. That's a premeditated homicide, even if it may, or may not, have been justified. Covering it up definitely isn't justified. So, you think Tom may have some hidden darkness of his own? Some violent streak that could be rearing its ugly head now? Cedric sighed. Spinning a yarn about his daughter having a demonic possession issue would be a great way to lure your sister into his clutches. When did Tom move out this way? Ember saw a gator lounging beside a much-encrusted pond. This is barely civilization any longer. He had to have a place of residence, and since Cassandra's place got burned down in that weird fire, he moved into a shack his grandfather bequeathed him. No indoor toilet, but he has satellite Wi-Fi. Go figure. Ember grunted. Not to mention he has an ankle monitor. Yeah, I'm most curious to find out how he's been circumventing that. They pulled off onto a pothole-ridden drive leading to Tom's shack. Ember felt a stab of sympathy at him for living in such a modest dwelling. The trailers and RVs the wrestlers lived out of seemed spacious by comparison. Tom opened the lone door, revealing a space not much larger than a one-car garage, a kitchen area featuring an old-fashioned wooden stove, a military-issue cot, and a beat-up love seat were his sole furnishings. "Oh, hey, Sheriff," Tom said, tucking his leg back behind the door frame. "What brings you out here?" "You can quit trying to hide the fact you removed your ankle monitor, Tom," Cedric growled. "That's not even why I'm here." Tom pushed the door open all the way. "Is this about Ash?" Ember took a step forward. "What about her?" Tom swallowed. I heard she was missing." "How'd you hear that, living way out here?" Cedric cocked an eyebrow. "You been slipping the anklet off a lot? Taking a lot of trips into town? And elsewhere?" "Hey, don't tell them I'm doing this, Sheriff. Come on," Tom said. "They'll lock me back up for sure if you do." "Tom, I can't help you if you don't let me. How did you find out about Ash being missing?" "I have the internet, you know, and it's all over town. The witches on allmagicmatters.com are having a field day with Beulah casting a spell for law enforcement." "All Magic Matters?" Ember asked with a frown. "Where have you been? It's all over social media." "We have lives, Tom. Real lives. We don't have time for that nonsense." Tom swallowed, nodding at Cedric. "Oh, well, it's a support group for witches who think that they've been unfairly targeted by authorities because they practice, in their words, non-Hearthstone magics." "Dark magic, they mean?" Cedric shook his head and sighed. "Why does everyone want to be an exploited minority these days?" "I don't know. I'm hardly a supporter of dark witches." Ember snorted. "Yeah, you've killed one." Tom grimaced, his face turning red. "Yes, and I'm paying for it, all right? I know it wasn't right. You think I haven't thought that maybe I just should have grabbed my kid and ran? But it's like, when you're fighting a mind spell, you don't come all out of it at once like leaving a swimming pool. More like once in a while you can stick your face above the surface for a few lucid breaths, and then you're back under." "You felt you had to act before you lost the will to do so," Cedric said, arching his brows. "Yeah, exactly. Look, I'm sorry Ash is missing, but I had nothing to do with it. She was fine the last time I saw her." "When was that?" "The day before yesterday, around 9 o'clock, I guess. She examined April and said the kid was just going through a tough time, not possessed." Cedric frowned. Where did this exam take place? "At Rose's place, my ex's house." Tom swallowed hard. "Say, Sheriff, you think there's a chance April could come stay with me? I hate to think of her being with a stranger after her mother's death." "Not my department, Tom," Cedric said, shaking his head. "Did Ash happen to say where she was going?" "No, but she seemed in a big hurry. She took off back toward town, and that's the last I've seen or heard from her. I swear." "You know I have to ask where you were when Rose died, Tom, right?" Tom heaved a heavy sigh. "I know. I was here with my ankle monitor off. I don't have an alibi." Cedric stood up. "Tom, you're going to call the monitoring company and tell them what you've done. It's up to them if they inform the correctional board. In any event, I expect to know where you are at all times from now on. Here or in a jail cell is up to you." Tom nodded swiftly. "I'll call them, Sheriff. I swear." Ember and Cedric took their leave. Ember cocked her eyebrow at her husband as they got into the squad car. Do you believe him about Ash? Cedric shook his head. I'm not sure. I do know he's holding something back. Ember nodded. I thought so too. But what? Cedric's radio crackled. Sheriff Jameson, are you reading this? Over. Cedric grabbed the microphone receiver and held it to his mouth. This is Jameson. Sorry, I was away from my squad car. What's going on? I know it's getting late, Sheriff, but I've got bad news. UPS man just called the station. They just found another body in town. Chapter 11. The squad car bounced along the rough road, sending the high beams lancing crazily through the swamp. Ember glanced over at Cedric, his face drawn into a grim glower. First Rose, and now Kevin Whitman. Do you think the deaths could be related? Too early to speculate, Cedric said. It does seem like bodies keep turning up, though, doesn't it? But is it related to Rose's case, though? Cedric shook his head. Possibly. Kevin was a survivalist prepper nutjob, though. Who knows what he had out here on his property? Like what? Poisons, explosives, chemicals to create weapons or preserve food. Any number of things may have done him in. Men like him are also huge suicide risks. Ember cocked an eyebrow. Really? Yes, he fits the bill. He's in his 40s but single, aggressively conservative in his views of government, and spends much of his time online speaking to people as inflammatory as he is. You really think he'd kill himself? Maybe, maybe not. I'm just saying we should remain open to the possibility that Kevin Whitman's death is completely unrelated to either your sister's disappearance or Rose's demise. Ember nodded firmly. Right. We don't want to prejudice ourselves. Still, I've got a bad feeling it's all twisted together. Cedric pulled around a bend and Whitman's property line fence appeared in the headlights. Me too. We'd best stay on our toes. Cedric slowed as they approached the 10-foot-high cyclonic fence crowned with razor wire. Nearby, a brown delivery truck sat catty-corner from the gate entrance, the driver looking at them in misery as they exited the squad car. I didn't touch nothing, the driver said. He dropped out to the ground, proving to be a tall, lanky fellow with an unruly beard contrasting with his shaven head. I saw him laying there and I called the station. Cedric approached the driver while Ember squinted through the fence to see Kevin Whitman's pudgy form laying face down in a muddy stretch between his front door and his gate. Ember pursed her lips. You think he could still be alive? Maybe just unconscious? The driver laughed. Look at his face. His mouth and nose are covered by water. Unless he's Aquaman, I doubt he's living. Ember covered her mouth with her hand. It was true. Kevin Whitman's still form would remain that way. Forever. You haven't touched anything, is that right? Cedric asked, scribbling on his notepad. Nothing except the buzzer button to let him know I was here. You buzzed him after finding him laying face down in a puddle? The driver flinched. I didn't notice him at first, all right? I didn't get much sleep, and this is my second job, you know? Cedric shook his head. Hang out for a bit, I'm going to want to talk to you further. The driver climbed miserably back into his truck. Cedric frowned at the gate assembly. Without Kevin Whitman to open it for us, we're locked out. Ember cast a minor spell and placed her fingers on the magnetic lock. A small buzz later, the door slid open a few inches. Ember grinned at Cedric and he pursed his lips. Not technically legal. As an officer, it's your duty to ascertain if the scene is safe. Would you rather climb? Because I can close it again. Cedric's hand closed on the gate. No, that's quite all right. Sorry, you currently aren't privy to all the times we've had almost this exact conversation. Oh yeah? Cedric chuckled. Who usually wins? Ember grinned. Who do you think? Cedric laughed. Fair enough. They examined Kevin Whitman's body, finding no obvious wounds. Ember glanced over at the delivery driver, but his gaze remained on the dully glowing cell phone in his hands. I'll check for Fairy's death's headcaps in his system, Ember said. She cast the spell, a grimace coming to her face as she stared at the body with her eldritch vision. Yes, he's been poisoned, all right. Cedric ran a hand down his face and sighed. Swell. Then I guess we need to sweep for the fairy caps on his entire property then. Did you bring your wand? Ember sighed. I did, but I don't think it's a good idea for us to try and blunder around on Whitman's property trying to find the mushrooms growing out here. Why is that? For one thing, Whitman was a well-known prepper nut, so he's probably got booby traps or other nasty surprises around. Not to mention it's dark out. Cedric nodded. Good point. Then there's the fact that it's highly unlikely Rose has been out this way since before she was poisoned. More likely than not, Kevin Whitman and Rose ingested the mushrooms at the same time. Cedric walked over to a nearby wooden stump, splintered and riddled with holes. Obviously, Kevin Whitman had used it as a target practice dummy. Cedric ripped a piece of paper down from the post, which had been stapled across the battered surface. If they both ingested the mushrooms around the same time, Cedric said, then this might have been where it happened. Ember stared at the shot-up bit of paper, but still recognized the survey card from Oberkorp. The Homeowners Association meeting, Ember said, where Oberkorp made their pitch to buy the entire neighborhood. Cedric nodded. Time for us to pay Mr. Olbermann a visit. Chapter 12. The next afternoon, Ember closed up the pub early so she and Cedric could drive to nearby Lake Petite, barely large enough to count as a city and the home to Ron Olbermann's local offices. Are we sure he's even going to be at his office? I mean, a guy like him gets around. According to his secretary, he's going to be in town for another week or two. He's hoping to get a rezoning bill added to next year's city council ballot. Ridiculous. A board member would have to sponsor it and get at least 100 Koshari natives to sign off on a petition requesting the vote. Cedric glanced over at Ember. You're underestimating how much money some people stand to make if this goes through, Ember, especially Olbermann himself. I thought everyone was on the same page about keeping Koshari just as it is. We don't need shopping malls and interstates and for-profit university campuses clogging up the landscape. I agree. But there's just as many people in town who are at least considering supporting the movement toward growth as opposing it. Ember rubbed the bridge of her nose and sighed. It seemed like everything was changing at the speed of light. Even forgetting her own problems with Cedric's magically induced memory loss, the sleepy Louisiana community was changing. Into what? She couldn't say. Hopefully a form not so different from its current iteration. Lake Petit sat in a small valley, a shimmering body of water dominating the view from the highway. The town's namesake had a vaguely horseshoe shape, and while it proved too small for boats, it was just right for citizens who wanted to take a cooling dip to escape the summer heat. Lake Petit was the county seat, which led to a small profusion of modern structures in the downtown area. Mostly lawyers' offices, banks, and restaurants, as well as the charmingly baroque, if small, courthouse. Not surprisingly, a majority of the cases weren't even heard in the old courthouse but took place in the municipal building across the street. Ember pursed her lips as they hit the downtown area. It's grown a lot since the last time I was through here. When was that? Cedric slowed to a stop at a red light and glanced over at her. Years now. Back when I needed to apply for the liquor license for the pub, I think. It's been quite a while. They parked in the circle drive in front of the municipal building. Ron Olbermann rented space on the 15th floor as high as he could go. Ember glanced up at the top floor, wondering if he were watching them right then. Take a look at this propaganda, Cedric said, pointing at a mural depicting Ron Olbermann holding a child on his knee with a billowing American flag behind them. Saving today by protecting tomorrow was written large across the stylized flag. Somebody likes the look of his own face quite a bit, Ember said, nodding her head. Classic narcissist. Narcissists aren't always killers or even violent, Cedric said. But when they do turn that way, they usually go all out. Jim Jones, Senator McCarthy. Ember took his arm. Come on, we want to catch him while he's still in his office. Cedric came along with her, a bit stiffly. She glanced up at him. What's wrong? Nothing, Cedric said. Ember looked down and saw she was holding his hand. She sheepishly released it. I'm sorry. Force of habit. Well, it wasn't unpleasant or anything, Cedric said. Oh? Ember arched a brow as they entered the building. A bailiff moved over to greet them, offering a hand for a shake. Sheriff Jameson, the bailiff said. It's been a stretch. It has indeed, Jonas. You here to testify in a case or something? Cedric shook his head. No, I'm here to speak with Ron Olbermann. Jonas's face contorted into an ebon grimace. Oh, you mean Satan? Cedric laughed while Ember gasped, but Jonas shook his head. You laugh, but I'm not wrong. He bought out the power company here in town and fired half the linemen. You know, to save money. Now, when there's a storm and the power goes out, it takes a week to come back on, instead of a day or two, at most, like in the old days. Ember pursed her lips. If he keeps doing things like that, why do people do business with him at all? Money talks, and everyone always thinks they're the ones who aren't going to get screwed. Anyway, Mr. Big Shot is on the top floor. Good luck. Cedric and Ember took the elevator to the 15th floor. Ron Olbermann's office suite was relatively small, less than a dozen employees in cubicles. A receptionist buzzed them into the only real door in the suite, the one which led to Olbermann's personal office. Really, Sheriff, Olbermann said with a chuckle. Yes, both of those people signed the guest log for the HOA meeting, and yes, I spoke there. But that doesn't mean I had anything to do with their sad, unfortunate deaths. Neither of them wanted to sell their land to you, Cedric said. Kevin Whitman even used your pamphlet for target practice. Seems like motivation to me. Olbermann laughed. Does it? Trust me, Sheriff. I don't have to do anything but wait. Sooner or later, the economy will tank again, the housing market will fall through, and those people will be begging me to buy their properties at a reduced cost. Ember didn't like the slick-talking, middle-aged man, but she couldn't detect anything magical in his nature. How would he even know about fairies' death's head caps? Mr. Olbermann, Ember said suddenly, you often cater the HOA meetings you attend, is that right? So what if I do? Olbermann shrugged. You might think it's bribery, but I like to eat too. Do you remember the name of the catering company you used? Olbermann frowned. What difference does that make? Just answer the question, sir, Cedric said, letting menace creep into his voice. Sounds like something below my pay grade. Go ask my secretary. That's her department. We will. We'll be in touch, Mr. Olbermann. Olbermann smiled, though his eyes seemed filled with annoyance to Ember's mind. But were they the eyes of a killer? She hoped they would soon find out. Chapter 13. Ember and Cedric spoke with Olbermann's secretary, a very put-upon woman who tore through dozens of files and clicked on at least that many databases trying to find the data in question. It seemed Olbermann was a very busy man, who had many meetings and seminars similar to the one he'd conducted at the HOA gathering. She scrawled the name and address of the catering company across the back of a business card at last, and slid it over to Cedric. I hope this helps, Sheriff. Honestly, I'm not used to this network of small towns. A lot of the local businesses don't even have websites, if you can believe that. Some folks are just living in a backward age, Cedric said with a smile. Thank you much, ma'am. On their way back out to the car, Ember cocked an eyebrow at Cedric. You ever hear of that catering place? I think so. Ember sighed. It was one of the ones we looked at for our wedding, but we wound up going with a different choice. I was hoping maybe... Never mind. Cedric frowned. You were hoping it would jog my memory somehow. Ember nodded. A long shot, to be sure. Sorry I put you through that. Cedric shook his head. No, let's try everything. The long shots and the sure shots. Anything to get my memory back. I've got the feeling I'm missing out on something real special." His warm eyes looked at her with yearning. Ember swallowed hard, not having seen that look in Cedric's eyes in some time. "I guarantee you're missing out on a lot," Ember whispered. Cedric leaned in close enough she could feel his breath across her skin. She inclined her chin as his lips grew nearer. Sheriff, wanted to catch you before you made it out the door." Jonas jogged up to their side as Ember ground her teeth in frustration. "You wanted me to check up on that thing for you? Well, my nephew is all into those viral video things." Ember ran a hand down her face. The only problem with small-town Louisiana was everyone had to spin a simple story into a yarn. "I'm aware of the phenomenon," Cedric said. "Like the piano-playing cat?" Jonas frowned. "That's so 2010. No, you may have been living under a rock, but street racing is all the rage." Jonas showed his phone screen to them. A frozen image of a red and yellow sports car with custom trim and paint appeared. Jonas tapped the screen and it resolved itself into a video of a car race. A poorly shot, badly lit, nausea-inducing car race. "This group, they call themselves the Sons of the Wheel." Jonas blathered on. "That medallion you got? Well, the number at the bottom corresponds to a code you can decipher online. It's coordinates and a date." "Coordinates and a date for what?" Cedric asked. "Coordinates and a date for the next races," Jonas said, his eyes going wide. "And I'd check up on it no matter how full of malarkey you think I am at the moment." "Why is that?" Cedric asked, cocking an eyebrow. "Because the next race is taking place in your jurisdiction, Sheriff. At the old salt mines." "I see." Cedric's brow furrowed with thought. Ember thought of the area around the mines, with their long, straight roads but little traffic, and thought perhaps it would be a good place for a race. With the many dips, hills, and sudden curves in some areas of the depleted mines. However, it could also be quite dangerous. Jonas shared the video URL to Cedric, and they departed the municipal building. The oppressive heat and humidity hit them like a wall. "Whew," Cedric said. "Sure would be nice to have a breeze." Ember fanned herself. "What do you think Ash could be doing, mixed up with street racers?" Cedric cleared his throat. Ember knew he was about to say something he didn't think she wanted to hear. "Well, to be honest, it's not that out of character for Ash." "Cedric?" "Come on, I'm not disparaging her, but she gravitates toward what my granddad used to call dangerous fun. She hangs out with dark spellcasters, for one thing. Street racing hooligans don't seem like much of a stretch to me." Ember rubbed her eyes and groaned. "I wish I could argue with you, but Ash and I have had a long, hard road to being sisters again. I wish you'd be a little more sensitive to that." Cedric frowned. "I'm sorry, You don't remember, of course." Ember sighed. "All right, let's assume they have something to do with Ash. We need to crash their little party, and, thanks to the medallion, we know when and where it will be, right?" Cedric laughed incredulously. "Ember, are you kidding me? Some of these people are just hot-rodding teens straight out of a James Dean flick, but some of them, drug dealers, gangbangers. It's no place for, a woman?" Ember glared at him. "Is that what you were about to say?" "A civilian," Cedric finished. "It's bound to be dangerous." "Fighting a 100-foot house on chicken legs was dangerous. I can handle this. Besides, it sounds like fun. You know I used to go to the stock car races every Friday until they shut down." Cedric glanced her way, his lips a thin, tight line. "I don't like it, but I agree I need some magical backup. I just wish it didn't have to be you, Ember. I'm kind of fond of you, you know, even if I can't remember the last couple years." Ember smiled, her heart warming. "Thank you, that's nice to hear." Cedric shrugged. "If we got together once, it's bound to be at least in part because we were compatible. It's not out of reason for it to happen twice." Ember actually felt a blush come to her cheeks. "No, it's not. Let's get back to koshery. We should be able to catch the caterers before they close up shop for the night." Cedric nodded. "Agreed. If they've served deadly mushrooms knowingly or unknowingly, then we need to talk to them." Ember settled back in her seat, trying to rein in a mind in turmoil. She needed to get her focus back in case she needed to use magic. An unsettling feeling told her there might be trouble at the catering office. Chapter 14. They rolled into Cauchery's town square just after 5 in the afternoon. Cedric glared at the shaded windows of the Cuisine King catering service. I think we're too late. Their website says the office is open until 7 p.m. every day but Sunday. Ember grunted. Apparently they specialize in providing lunch to daycare centers. The origin of the pea carrot mash confirmed, Cedric said with a chuckle. I really don't think they're still open, though. Ember stared intently at the shuttered windows, searching for some sign of movement within. I think you're right about that. Maybe they closed early, or their closing time is listed on the website wrong. Yeah, but I think they've been closed for a while now. Cedric opened the door and exited the squad car but left the engine running. He bent low and retrieved a piece of colored paper from the sidewalk in front of the catering company's entrance. Cedric returned, handing her the slip of paper. Think you can check that address? Oh, they've moved, Ember said. Wait a minute. Where are you going? Cedric asked as she opened her door. Ember exited the car and stepped backward, peering at the realty sign at the end of the lot. Olbermann. It just figured. They sold their old location, and guess who bought it? Olbermann. For someone who's waiting for the next recession, he sure is in a hurry to buy up as much of town as he can. Ember rubbed her temples, the oppressive heat wearing on her. Let's just find their new location, and hopefully get some answers. They followed the map on her phone back into town. The Cuisine King had moved into a former auto repair garage. The location was a definite step down from their previous building, except Ember figured it was closer to their main clientele. Cauchery had one post office, one grocery store, and more than a dozen churches, and each of them had a daycare program. Looks like we're in luck. Cedric gestured at the door, which stood propped open by a chair. They moved past the unconventional doorstop and approached the counter. The woman sitting behind it looked up at them in misery. She fanned herself with a folded brochure, sweat glistening on her face. Awful hot in here, Cedric said, tugging at his collar. AC broken? What AC? The receptionist asked in misery. How can I help you? Are you looking to cater the policeman's ball? Cedric chuckled softly. No, ma'am, I'm afraid not. I'm here to see whoever was responsible for catering this event. He handed her the receipt from the HOA event where Rob Olbermann attempted to coerce the denizens of Cauchery to sell their properties. The woman stared at it, then shook her head. None of those names match our boys. It can't be us. That's your company name right there. Unless you've had a complete staff overhaul in the last couple of days, it has to be by your team. She glared harder. Her lips curled up in a sneer. Oh, I think I know what happened. We probably outsourced that one because we were overbooked as it was. Outsourced catering? Cedric frowned thoughtfully. Yeah, we thought we were going to have to turn that one down. But just that day a guy stopped by and gave our manager his business card. Just in the nick of time, and they only took a 30% commission. Ember arched her brow. Sounds too good to be true. I know, right? What was the name of this business? The woman held up her finger. Just a moment. I think I still have the business card around here somewhere. Ah, here we go. Manpower Etsy. Manpower etc., Cedric said, taking the card. Thank you, ma'am. Have a great day. If I don't melt first, the woman said, fanning herself off. Ember shook her head as they made their way back to the squad car. I don't get it. Why sell your perfectly suitable building to move into a dump without air conditioning? It's hard to turn down a fistful of cash, especially in times like these. Cedric glanced over at her with an inscrutable light in his eyes. Don't be so quick to judge. Hey, I'm a small business owner too, Ember said hotly. I have a stake in this matter as well. I can't compete with a Buffalo Wild Wings or a Hooters. Cedric frowned. The good townsfolk would never tolerate a Hooters. The good townsfolk tolerate a coven of dark witches and mysterious death, Cedric. I think some busty co-eds with booty shorts aren't as much of a stretch as you might think. Cedric laughed. Does that mean you'll start doing a whole Coyote Ugly thing? Dancing on your bar? The only people dancing on my bar are ghosts, and they usually prefer to keep their spectral knickers on. Ember's smile faded as they came upon the address. Look, there in the old bread store. Cedric pulled into the parking lot, gravel crunching under the tires. The oil stains in the parking spots around the small, squarish building seemed old and faded. Cedric peered in the window and shook his head. Place is locked up tight. I can see some desks and what might be a filing cabinet, but it looks deserted. Well, we should go inside and poke around. Ember gestured at the door. We can't do that. It's against the law. Yes, but my sister is missing, and she could be in imminent danger, Ember said. The clue to her location might be inside of the old bread shop. Aren't you obligated to check it out? Cedric's brow furrowed as he leaped through the mental hoops she'd laid out. Besides, Ember said with a grin, casting a quick spell, the door was wide open when we got here. The door swung open and Cedric laughed. After you, he said, gesturing inside the dark, abandoned building. Chapter 15. Ember crept inside the darkened environs of the old bread store. Her hand reached out for the light switch, fumbling until she felt it under her fingertips. She grunted in frustration as her repeated flips failed to yield results. Looks like the power's out, she said. Cedric entered, a flashlight gripped over his shoulder, spearing through the darkness. It looks pretty cleared out, unfortunately. Manpower, etc., Ember said, putting her hands on her hips and pursing her lips. What are the odds they turned in their business card on exactly the day Olbermann's order came in? Cedric nodded. A local would have known better than to lean on Cuisine King this time of year, but Olbermann's people probably didn't. Seems like a setup. Someone went through a lot of trouble to serve food at that HOA meeting. Ember cast a minor spell, causing a candle-sized light to appear in the air near her shoulder. It illuminated as brightly as Cedric's flashlight, and diffused its light more evenly. The interior revealed itself to be largely empty. A recycling bin turned over on its side. Detritus strewn across the floor between two empty desks was the sole feature which stood out. There's no computers, no files, no nothing, Cedric said. He opened a mini fridge in the lobby area and gagged, face twisting up in disgust. They left in a hurry. Somebody forgot their sushi and an open can of Pib Extra. Ember bent over to pick up a dusty penny from the floor. She palmed it and looked about, her eyes squinting into intense slits. She called on her arcane vision to scout the area. No magic of great import had been worked in the old bread store. There were faint traces here and there, but nothing she could pin down. Where did they keep the food? Ember glanced around. They catered an event with over 50 people attending. There must have been a place where they prepared and stored the food. She poured extra energy into her glowing flame and lifted her palm in the air. The flame grew larger, brighter, lighting up the interior of the bread store bright as day. Look. Cedric moved over against the far wall. See the scrape marks in the paint? I'm guessing there used to be a table sitting here. Ember pointed at the floor. Careful, dear, those look like mushrooms on the floor here. Cedric arched his brow. Dear? Ember slapped a palm over her face. I'm sorry. No, it's all right. I kind of like it. Cedric squatted down on the floor, covering his face with a handkerchief. Looks like fairy death's head caps to me. Dried up, though. Be extra careful. They're more potent when they're debrided. Ember cast a small charm, and a bubble appeared between her cupped hands. Stand aside for a moment. Cedric moved, and she sent the glowing, translucent bubble down to the floor. It absorbed the chunks of purplish-green mushroom caps off the floor, containing them within its belly. Ember floated her bubble out the door. What are you doing? That's evidence. It's deadly evidence. Besides, it's not personal enough for psychometry, just like the penny I found. Fair enough. Ember and Cedric returned to their search. Cedric turned up a business card with a phone number scrawled on the back in red ink. He showed it to Ember, who shrugged. I don't recognize the number. Do you? No, I have no clue who it belongs to. Ember's eyes narrowed. I know how we can find out. She took out her phone and dialed the number. After a few moments, she heard Ron Olbermann's voice. Is this the service? I did specify Hungarian gymnast, didn't I? Sorry, wrong number. Ember hung up and gave Cedric a wide-eyed stare. It's Ron Olbermann's phone. His personal line, in fact. He mistook me for a business associate. You're sure it was him? Ember nodded. Positive. Good enough for me. Why would a temp agency have the number of a billionaire CEO on a business card? Ember cocked an eyebrow. Good question. Could mean Olbermann was complicit with poisoning the people at the HOA Association. Are you sure it couldn't have been an accident? I mean, look how slapdash this temp agency must have been. They have a Shasta machine instead of Coke or Pepsi. Maybe they didn't know they were feeding people dangerous stuff? Ember shook her head. I seriously doubt that scenario, Cedric. The mushrooms are hard to find, hard to prepare without hurting yourself, and you need a decent amount if you're going to cook them down and still expect lethal potency. This was a deliberate act. Cedric nodded. All right, you've convinced me. You see anything else of interest here? Ember blew air out from her lips, moving her bangs about as she stared at the overturned recycling bin. Just this. I was putting it off until last because I'm pretty sure somebody spit their tobacco juice in it. Madam, allow me, Cedric said, lifting away the offending pages. And they say chivalry is dead. You're all just killing it real slow. Ember squinted as she saw something fall out of the bin as Cedric disposed of the soiled papers. Hang on. This looks like a list of names. What is it? A work schedule, Ember gasped. And Ash's name is on it. Ash worked for Manpower? Cedric glanced over at the far wall where they'd found the mushrooms. Then... Cedric didn't want to say it, but he didn't have to. Ember's mind rang out with the thought over and over again. Did my sister feed people poisonous mushrooms on purpose? Chapter 16. Ember leaned against the shaded side of the old bread store, a cold plastic cup of gas station iced tea in her hands. She pressed it up against her sternum, enjoying the way it spread cooling relief over her sweating skin. Nearby, Cedric spoke on the radio to his deputies, trying to track down the current locations of the people scheduled to work for Manpower. Ember didn't want to consider the implications of Ash's name being on that list, but she had little choice. As she had told Cedric, the mushroom poisoning couldn't have been an accident. It had to have been deliberate. Given Ash's powers, skills, and knowledge, it would stand to reason she would know how to find the rare mushrooms, then how to prepare and administer them to maximum effect. It also stood to reason that she would seek to leave town rapidly after having done so. Hence the vanishing act. Ember couldn't fathom Ash doing such a wicked deed. Even if Ash did like to walk on the wild side, she drew the line at using dark magic or hurting people other than in self-defense. Given Cedric's memory loss, Ember toyed with the idea that someone had cast a spell on Ash's mind as well, one that made her do things, like a puppet, or a possession. When Tom had attacked Ash, he'd claimed to have been possessed by an entity. Maybe it had gone after Ash once it failed to defeat her with Tom's body. Ember still hadn't figured it out when Cedric returned, the schedule folded over in his hand and a number 2 pencil tucked behind his ear. Interestingly enough, Manpower, etc. seems to have had one particular type for their choice of employees. What's that? Ex-convicts. Every single one of the names on here other than your sister's has a police record. Some of them have even done hard time. Ember scowled. That's suspicious. Yeah, maybe. I suggest we pay them a visit one by one and see if any of them has seen Ash. Ember brightened. Yes, please, that would be ideal. They returned to the air-conditioned comfort of the squad car and drove out to the first address on their list. Parker Lewis was nearing 70, his gap-toothed maw crooked and spewing barely intelligible profanities when they strode up. "Oh, son of—" He hacked and spat in the dirt. "Tell my parole officer I done went to my AA meeting." "I'm not here about your parole, Mr. Lewis." Cedric came up the steps of Lewis's porch and stood over the venerable man. "I want to know about the work you did for a temp agency called Manpower, etc." "Those bastards fired me the first day," he sputtered. "Said I kept getting spit in the food." Cedric wiped his face, a disgusted look marring his features. "I see. Thank you for your time." "Wait, Mr. Lewis. Do you remember a woman working there named Ash?" "I think so," Parker said, his face scrunching up. "Pretty girl. Did the salad bar, I think." Ember cringed. She and Cedric returned to his car and climbed inside. She sighed as the cool air blew across her sweating skin. "I hope the rest of them are more useful," Cedric muttered. "And less spitty," Ember agreed. They interviewed the next subject, Tracy Goodfoot. The native woman wasn't much older than Ember, yet had 4 children, 3 of whom wrestled about the living room of her trailer as she spoke with them. "Yeah, I remember that crummy job. Some guy and his girlfriend were in charge." Ember's eyes widened. "Some guy and his girlfriend? What was the girlfriend's name?" "Ashley, I think," Tracy said, her face scrunching up in thought. She didn't talk much, but she seemed sweet. Except when her boyfriend was around, then she was just as big of a jerk as he was. "This boyfriend have a name?" Cedric asked. "All I ever heard her call him was Big Daddy," Tracy said with a shrug. "Sounded like a gang name or something, or a hip-hop star. You know how the world is these days." "What did you serve to the HOA meeting attendees?" Cedric asked. "I had buffet experience from Golden Corral, so they put me on serving out the chicken." "What did the girlfriend Ashley serve?" Cedric asked. I think she was doing the salad stuff. Greens and vegetables." "Mushrooms?" Tracy nodded. "Yeah, I think I saw some mushrooms there too. Not the fun kind, though, if you catch my drift." Tracy laughed while Cedric sighed. "You realize I'm law enforcement and can't laugh at jokes like that, right?" Tracy got a hold of herself. "Ahem. Anyway, I only worked there the one day, got paid in cash by Big Daddy, and never heard from them again." Ember was tight-lipped as they drove to the last location on their list. Cedric glanced over at her, concern writ large on his handsome face. "What's wrong? It's looking more and more like Ash killed those people. Killed Rose and Kevin Whitman." "Let's not assume anything," Cedric said. "Yeah, mantra of the investigator. Only what else am I supposed to think?" "For now, you can give Ash the benefit of the doubt." Ember smiled. "You're right. Thanks." "Anytime." They pulled up outside the home of Dennis Helms, the last name on their list. Ember frowned as they came up the sidewalk. "There's 4 newspapers piled up on the porch." "I see it." Cedric drew his pistol and came up to the door. He rapped hard on the aluminum surface. "Mr. Helms? Police." He tried the door and it swung inward. Cedric coughed. Ember covered her mouth with her sleeve. The smell of death was unmistakable. Chapter 17. Ember brought a barrier spell into existence, blocking both hostile magics and the scent of rot. She spoke a word, and another witchfire bloomed into existence, flying inside the trailer to heartlessly, noiselessly explode. The inside of the trailer glowed to the point the walls seemed translucent. "The coast is clear," Ember said. "There's no one in there. No one living, anyway." Cedric nodded. He holstered his pistol and entered the trailer. Squatting down next to a huddled shape, Cedric shook his head sadly. "Dead. At least long enough to have keeled over the same time as our other victims. I'm betting if you cast a detection spell, we'll find more of the poisonous mushrooms in his system." Ember sighed. "Very well." She stepped into the trailer, trying not to let the stench overcome her. Mr. Helms had not lived the most hygienic of existences before his demise. She cast the spell, and nodded when she saw the purple traces in his bloodstream. Yes, same thing. Poisonous mushrooms? Ember gratefully exited the trailer and walked down the short steps, exulting in the fresh air. Cedric followed, calling on his radio for the coroner to come pick up the body. They waited in the car, air conditioner blasting, until the coroner arrived. Cedric and the coroner exchanged words, and then he surprised Ember by getting back behind the wheel. Don't you have to stay and conduct an investigation? We've got more pressing matters. If the coroner rules the cause of death is different than what it appears, we'll look into doing a thorough grid search of that revolting trailer. If it doesn't appear different, I'll consider it a relief. What's our more pressing matter? Ron Olbermann, Cedric said grimly. Someone at Manpower had his personal phone number on hand. Given that our 3 victims all attended the meeting and all are homeowners in the area he wants to glom onto, I'd say we've got enough to rattle his cage a little. Can you arrest him? Cedric shook his head. Not a chance. I need something more solid. I'm hoping he'll let something slip, maybe even come clean. They drove back to Olbermann's offices after calling his secretary to verify he would be there. Ember's belly gurgled with hunger when they rode the elevator up to the 15th floor, drawing a stare from Cedric. What? It's been a long time since we ate. What about that tamale place off the interstate? We could swing by there after we talk to Olbermann. Ember grinned. It's a date. They entered the office suite and found most of the cubicles empty. Cedric approached the harried-looking secretary outside of Olbermann's door. She put a call on hold, answered the phone a second time, and then put that call on hold as well before addressing them. Oh, Sheriff, I didn't see your name on my appointments list. That's probably because I don't have an appointment. I'd like to speak with Mr. Olbermann, please. She swallowed, clearly fearing disturbing her boss, but not wanting to refuse a police officer. Very well. Let me tell him you're coming. Just a moment, Ember said as the receptionist reached for the phone on the cradle. Where is everyone? I'm sorry. Your staff. This place was full the other day. The receptionist frowned. Mr. Olbermann fired most of them, caught them standing around the water cooler talking about trivia instead of working. Ember pursed her lips in distaste. Ron Olbermann seemed like a real piece of work. They were buzzed in the door to his office. Olbermann looked up and grimaced. Why are you here, Sheriff Jameson? I already answered all your questions. You can tell us how come the temp agency hired to cater your event has your personal phone number. Cedric flopped the glossy business card down onto the glass surface of Olbermann's desk. Olbermann leaned forward and squinted at the card. Yep, that's my handwriting, all right. I had Reggie at the Cuisine King pass along my card to the temp agency. Why? I've been looking into hiring temps to save money. They get the same work done for minimum wage, and you don't have to pay them benefits. Capitalism is great. Cedric smiled, but it was strained. So, you're saying you have had no direct contact with the members of the temp agency or its management? That's what I'm saying. Olbermann glared up at Cedric, then leaned back in his desk and scoffed. In fact, that's the last thing I'm saying without a lawyer present. You're not roping me into your wild conspiracy theories. Cedric chuckled. Thank you for your time, Mr. Olbermann. We'll be in touch soon. Ember followed Cedric out of the office. He shook his head in disgust as they entered the elevator. I've got nothing solid on him and he knows it, Cedric muttered. They rode to the ground floor in sullen silence. Ember was almost as upset by Olbermann's cruel behavior and attitude as his possible connection to the poisoning crime. Firing his staff on a whim, replacing his workers with temps so he could save some money. I've got an idea, Cedric said. It might lead us to the people behind Manpower. Ember perked up. What's that? All we have to do is talk to the man who owns the old bread store building, Cedric said with a grin. And I happen to know where he lives. Chapter 18. Ember bounced along in the passenger seat beside Cedric, her face creased with an incredulous scowl. You want to tell me how you know we're going to the right place this time again? Cedric shrugged. It's simple, really. Back in the day, the bread store was called the Dilly Dally Bread Store on account of it being owned by the Dilly Dally Bakery Company. I got that part, you don't have to. Ember's voice trailed off because Cedric was off again. That's when the Dilly Dally Baker Company went under for insider trading. But mean old lady Mrs. Hickenbottom turned out to be an angel because she bought the... Ember held up a hand. I'll admit I zoned out there a couple of times while you were telling me this story, Cedric. But did you call her mean old lady Mrs. Hickenbottom? Well, yeah, what did you call her? Mrs. Hickenbottom, Ember said, flabbergasted. Well, that was her nickname. Since when? Since always. Cedric swallowed hard. I'm guessing this is something I've never told you before. You're guessing right. And I'm guessing that you have fond memories of mean old lady Mrs. Ember's scowl intensified. That is Mrs. Hickenbottom, God rest her soul. You're batting 1,000, Cedric. Sorry, I guess I was kind of a rascal when I was a kid. Didn't you and Bobby Joe McIntyre bust out the pencil factory windows with slingshots when you were kids? Cedric laughed hard. I'm surprised I told you that story. It came out in bits and pieces. No, it wasn't Bobby Joe McIntyre, it was Hanky Bob Stubbs, and we didn't use slingshots, we used BB guns. Because of course you did, Ember said with a chuckle. Anyway, you were saying, Mrs. Hickenbottom bought the bread store and... Cedric frowned, his eyes swimming with confusion. What now? Oh, right. So Mrs. Hickenbottom bought the building and donated it to the city. They in turn donated it to Libby Sanchez, who operated a donut shop out of there called the Old Bread Store, Ember said. So who owns it now? Well, Libby passed on a few years back, which is when the donut shop shut down. Most folks assumed it reverted back to the city's ownership, but it turns out Libby had a boyfriend she bequeathed the building to upon her death. And this boyfriend is the owner? Is he still alive? He is. We're heading to his place right now. Ember sighed. Why do I get the feeling I'm going to regret tagging along for this one? They pulled up outside of a rundown gas station. A young man with dark skin and an easy smile rushed outside. Our pay at the pump is down, but I can help you inside at the counter. Cedric grinned. I'll be in there in a minute. Is your fountain soda machine working? Yes, we just got the repairman out here last week. Splendid. I got a hankering for a pink lemonade on this hot, hot day. Pink lemonade? That what they feed you pigs to make the bacon they sizzle off your behind taste better? Ember and Cedric turned their gazes on the speaker, a venerable man sitting in a lawn chair, shaded by the gas station's looming shape. He gripped a thin white cane in his gnarled, wizened fingers. A pair of dark glasses perched upon his wide nose. He grinned at them as they approached. How's it going, Sheriff? Suey, I smell a piggy. Ember was aghast. You're just going to let him talk to you like that? The man's brows came low over his glasses. He ain't going to do squat about it. I done got beat about the head so much by the dang popos trying to vote in '62 that I went blind. Cops don't scare me none. Cedric rolled his eyes. The story of how you lost your sight changes every week. Listen, Chitlin, I need to talk to you about that store you own. The bread stores? Chitlin leaned back in his chair and guffawed. Done forgot all about that place. What, some local kids finally burn it down or something? Did you rent it out recently? Yeah, so? It's my building. The people you rented it to may not have been the most reputable. What can you tell me about them? Not a dang thing. Chitlin laughed uproariously, slapping his knee. Not a dang thing. Chitlin, you must know something. Didn't they fill out some paperwork or something? Nah, I did all that nonsense over the web. Worked through an online property management company. Cedric scratched the back of his head, a puzzled frown wrinkling his features. Ember arched a brow at Chitlin. Wait, how did you set up the internet account when you're blind? Well, you see, after so many years of being blind, my fingertips have become so sensitive I can read the screen just by touching it. Ember gaped. Really? Chitlin burst into laughter. Nah, not really. Ha! I wish I could see your face right now. My grandson did all the dirty details for me. I probably done drank up the profits by now. Cedric sighed. Thanks for your time. Chitlin's grandson turned out to be a lot easier to deal with. He readily guided them to the website he used to set up the temporary lease with manpower, etc. They used PayPal to deposit the funds the first week, right on time. Then we stopped hearing from them. I went to the old bread store to change the locks and found it deserted. Thanks for your help, son, Cedric said. He and Ember piled back into the car. We'll head back to the station and check on this manpower, etc. company. They have to have offices somewhere. Ember sighed. So far, it's looking like our best suspect in the murder case is the subject of our missing persons case. Cedric put his hand on Ember's shoulder and gave it a brief squeeze before starting the car. Ember wondered if she would ever catch up to Ash, and what she would say if she finally did. Chapter 19. Deputy Smothers wasn't the bravest of Cedric's deputies, or the fastest, or even the smartest, really. He'd been the victim of his brother-in-law's snipe hunt some years back, so he wasn't a brilliant man. What Deputy Smothers excelled at was computers, not hacking them or anything truly illegal, or useful, or being anything more than a skilled hobbyist. Ember once assessed Smothers' computer skills as roughly equal with a contemporary middle schooler's level. Cedric had laughed and failed to disagree. Still, they were reasonably confident when Smothers told them manpower didn't have a physical base of operations that he spoke the truth. These days, you can list an address as a locker in a bus station, Smothers said, his wide, freckled face peeled back in a smile. His bulk sagged over a beleaguered rolling stool, to which he put the squealing test as he rolled across the office floor to his second monitor set up. See? Smothers tapped the screen with a pencil, sending little distortions through the screen. The guy who formed manpower, etc. He listed his address as being a hotel room in Borneo. He ran it out of a hotel in Borneo? Maybe, Smothers shrugged, though I think it's far more likely he never even stayed in that hotel. Maybe never even been to Borneo. Smothers rolled back to his original computer. Ember feared his stool would give out at any moment, but the stalwart furnishing continued its duty without collapse. Then he has the funds go through a PayPal account, which he cashes out into a Swiss savings account, which he then converts to Bitcoin, at which the funds become virtually untraceable. What's your point, Smothers? Cedric asked, stroking his chin as confusion reigned on his face. My point is this guy covered his tracks very, very well for a temp agency. What served one meal, and one meal only. Smothers looked up at Cedric with more than a little fear in his gaze. These people are professionals, Sheriff. International criminal cartel kind of professional. Are you afraid, Deputy Smothers? Cedric asked. Not really, given everything else that goes on in this town. My cousin swears he saw a house on chicken legs when he went quail hunting a while back. Ember and Cedric exchanged a look. Cedric cleared his throat. About this alleged person or persons behind the manpower, etc. agency, what are the chances we could lay hands on them? Smothers heaved a heavy sigh, then pushed his glasses up on his nose. Slim to none, Sheriff. I wish I had better news. They used an onion router and hid their location every step of the way. We'd need the cooperation of dozens of national and international agencies just to figure out half of it. I guess we'll have to solve this case with good old-fashioned detective work instead of fancy computers, Deputy Smothers. Cedric patted him on the shoulder. Still, nice work. I appreciate it. No problem, Sheriff. I'm glad to actually be of use for once. Cedric nodded. You ever hear of the Sons of the Wheel, Smothers? Yeah, I think so. His face scrunched up in thought. Street racing's not really my thing, but everybody's heard about the Sons. They managed to keep their gatherings secret from law enforcement. Cedric chuckled. Usually that's true. They do try to keep their gatherings secret from law enforcement. Smothers' mouth gaped open. You know when they're racing? Cedric cocked an eyebrow. I can't comment on an ongoing investigation. Oh, of course not, Smothers said, his eyes downcast. Ember chuckled. What happened to not caring about the Sons of the Wheel, Clint? Ember asked. Well, I didn't say I don't care about them, just that street racing wasn't my thing. Cedric chuckled. Thanks for checking this out for me, Deputy. I'll buy you lunch sometime. Keep up the good work. Yes, sir, Sheriff, sir, Smother said. Ember and Cedric headed outside, the heat hitting them like a solid wall. Phew, never thought I'd appreciate air conditioning so much. It's a hot one, all right, Cedric said, mopping his brow. Hotter than a flapjack fresh off the griddle. What can we do now? Ember shielded her eyes from the bright sun with her hand as they walked out to the squad car. Manpower might as well be untouchable. The only one with a clue as to who they might be is my sister Ash, who's missing, and might even be complicit in the crime. Ember hid her face in her hands as Cedric turned over the engine. I just want to talk to Ash so much. I need to talk to her so much it's driving me crazy. I can't just sit around doing nothing while we hope the truth stumbles and falls into our lap. Well, we don't have to. It sounds to me like our best lead on manpower is Ash, and our best lead on Ash happens to be the medallion for the Sons of the Wheel races. Ember's eyes went wide. Are you suggesting we try to bust them? We'll be sorely outnumbered. No, I think we need to go incognito, Cedric said, cocking an eyebrow and a lopsided grin her way. No one needs to know I'm the sheriff, and nobody needs to know you're a witch. The only way they'd come close to accepting us into their world is if we had, what did Smothers call it last week? A sweet whip? Whatever the kids are calling a flashy street racing hot rod these days. Cedric grinned. Great idea, Ember. We need a hot rod. We do? Yes, and I know just the guy to see about getting one. Chapter 20. The sun sat fat and red on the horizon, squatting like a hungry spider along the road as they sped away from town. Ember glanced over at Cedric. He spread his lips wide in a wolfish grin. So, you're sure this friend of yours... I'm sorry. What was his name again? Hanky Bob, Cedric said. Right, Hanky Bob, Ember replied, struggling to keep her growing impatience out of her tone. He's a moonshiner? Yes, that he is, a darn good one, too. Ember ran a hand down her face. Look, Cedric, I'm trying to be patient here, I really am, but you're the sheriff. Yes? Cedric said, tilting his head to the side in confusion. And he's a moonshiner, Ember said in exasperation. Yes, I don't see your point. Ember buried her face in her hands. He's a criminal. You're the police. You can't be friends with a criminal. Well, thing is, Hanky Bob's place is right over the county line in Buford Muscles. That puts him out of my jurisdiction, technically. But he's breaking the law. Aren't you violating some oath or something? Ember, the main oath I remember taking was to protect and serve. Hanky Bob has never and will never hurt anyone, unless they drink too much of his green apple pie shine. Green apple pie? Ember's eyes narrowed. Wait a minute. You get me a jar of apple pie whiskey for Christmas every year and said it was from your grandpa. Cedric's brow broke out in a sheen of sweat. Ah, well, it probably comes from Hanky Bob, as I don't have any memory of getting shine from my gramps. Swell. Ember leaned her head against the cool glass of the cruiser and sighed. I wonder how many other things my husband has been hiding from me. I'm sorry. Please, Cedric, for the love of all that's decent, stop apologizing. It doesn't help, and in fact kind of makes things worse, all right? So stop. Cedric sighed. Okay. They drove for a time in silence. Cedric glanced over at her, his eyes swimming with an intense yet inscrutable light. Hey, can I ask you a question? Ember took a long moment before answering in a tight voice. Sure. When I had my memories, did I tell you that you're beautiful? Because you are. Ember closed her eyes, a smile on her face but a sob in her heart. Sometimes you told me that. I never got tired of hearing you say it. Listen, Ember, Cedric said, clearing his throat. I don't know when, or even if, I'll be getting my memories back. but you and me really seem to— Cedric, look out! Ember grabbed the wheel and jerked it to the right. Cedric screamed as they careened around a huge alligator, which had heaved itself onto the packed dirt road to absorb the dying sunlight. Cedric fishtailed the old Crown Victoria all over the road until he regained control. Ember stared back at the giant beast, whistling at how close their tire tracks came to hitting it. Man, that was close. Gators are bad this year. It's their domain, Cedric. We're the invaders. True enough. Cedric's eyes widened. Here we are. This is Hanky Bob's place. Cedric slowed to a crawl as they approached a crossroad. The one-lane gravel road had a patch of green separating the two rocky halves. Weeds had grown up here and there, flattened by the recent passage of cars. A rusted metal signpost designated it Hanky Bob Lane, with a grinning tow truck as a mascot. It might get a little bumpy, Cedric said. He pulled off onto the gravel road. They came over a slight rise and then down a hill to come upon a large farmhouse flanked by two garages. The seemingly abandoned feel of the entrance belied the bustle within. More than a dozen cars sat around the property, at least that she could see. Ember wondered how many more might be within the barns. Some of the cars had their hoods open, shirtless, dirty men moving between them and peering inside, or fiddling with this and that. A bearded giant of a man with the most innocent teddy bear eyes Ember had ever seen rushed over to greet them as they exited the squad car. Cedric, why are you showing up in your uniform? You want to scare my friends off? Cedric laughed. Ah, you know I'm out of my jurisdiction, you old cuss. Hanky Bob, this is my wife Ember. Oh yeah, nice to meet you. Hanky Bob wiped his hand on a shop towel and then offered it for a shake. Ember's hand disappeared inside of his paw. Sorry I missed the wedding. I was out of state for a tractor pull. Hanky Bob's sweet machine took second place in regionals, Cedric said. Hanky Bob left to get them beers from the cooler. Ember turned toward her husband and cocked her eyebrow. There's a whole other side of you I've never seen, Cedric. Yeah, well, maybe I was too afraid of you judging me when I had my memories, Cedric said with a shrug. Maybe you were, Ember said. Of course I'm a witch who owns a tavern. How judgy you really think I'm going to get? Hanky Bob returned with their beers. Here you are. Cold as the devil is naughty. Now what can I do for you, Cedric? You only come out this way when you need something, and you brought the old lady to charm me, no less. Cedric sighed. Am I really that predictable? Yeah, but it's fine, it's cool. Helping you out makes me feel like completing my civic duty. I'm glad to hear you say that. I need a hot rod. Hanky Bob grinned. Sweet. You thinking 2.5 tons of screaming Detroit steel? Little lead sled? Hank. No? Maybe more into the Tokyo Drift Kings type of deal? I've got a guy, Ajito. He can get you everything you need, man. I'm talking suspension, sound system, paint job, the works. Hanky Bob, Cedric said with a sigh. You don't understand me. I need a hot rod now, as in right now. Oh, Hanky Bob said. Well, that's a brew of a different vintage, but I might have the hookup. Just a minute. Hanky Bob went to confer with a greasy-haired man. Cedric checked his messages, his face growing grave. What's wrong? Ember asked. There's an officer from the Department of Family Services at the station, he said, his eyes full of anxiety. And she wants to see me now. Chapter 21. Hanky Bob's garage complex lost its cheer as Ember digested the news about the family services officer waiting for them at the station. It almost had to be about April. What had befallen the family now? Had April succumbed to toxic mushrooms as well? Or had something even more unthinkably worse happened? Ember's mind raced a mile a minute as Cedric conferred with Hanky Bob. Hate to just run, Hanky Bob, but duty calls. No problem, just hit up old Mickey whenever you're ready for that chassis. He's got a Datsun 720 that he can't sell that you can probably pick up cheap. Thanks again. I'll be in touch soon. Cedric jogged back to the squad car and folded his tall form behind the wheel. Ember met his gaze, and neither spoke for a long moment. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? she asked at length. Maybe. Are you thinking Tom was right and April really is possessed? That's one of the awful things going through my mind. Oh, Cedric, that poor girl has gone through so much. Why can't the universe just leave her alone? Not the way the universe works, Cedric said, looking over his shoulder as he backed the squad car around in the gravel lot. But the universe puts people like you and me out there, too. We help girls like April. Ember felt a surge of hopeful energy sear through her body. Cedric was right. Just because things were bad didn't mean they couldn't get better, especially with some help. You're right. I just hope whatever hope we can render doesn't traumatize her further. The drive back into Cauchery seemed ponderous and miserable. A sense of trepidation and doom gnawed at Ember's gut. She looked out the window, watching the brilliant green landscape flash past, golden sunlight lending an Eden-esque quality. Yet her mood failed to improve, as it often did when she took the time to appreciate nature. They pulled into the station lot at last. Ember noticed an unfamiliar car, a candy apple red two-door sedan, parked in the visitor's designated spot. Cedric held the door for her as Ember entered the air-conditioned cool of the station's interior. A tall, familiar-seeming woman glanced up from a People magazine, hope writ large on her mocha-skinned face. Ember? Ember McNair? The woman stood up, red-dyed curls bouncing as she strode forward with her hand outstretched. Simone LeBeau, Ember said, a small smile stretching her lips. Long time no see. Yep, well, I only recently finished grad school and moved back to town. Cedric walked up, cocking an eyebrow. You two know each other? Ember nodded. Simone LeBeau, this is my husband. Also the sheriff, Cedric Jameson. Cedric, this is my old friend Simone LeBeau. We used to be in a coven together. Light magic only, Simone said firmly as she shook Cedric's hand. She cocked an eyebrow. So, a shifter, huh? Wolf shifter, to be exact, Cedric said. I guess you can read auras as well as Ember can. Probably not. She always had more of the talent than I did. Simone's face fell into a somber mask. I'm sorry to rush through pleasantries, but we have urgent matters to discuss with regards to April Ditkowitz. I understand. My office is this way. Cedric gestured for Simone to accompany them. They settled in Cedric's spacious office, dominated by his hand-carved wooden desk. Ember and Simone sank into the comfortable chairs facing opposite, though Simone quickly stood up once again to hand Cedric a packet. Last evening, April was doing homework with her foster parent, Crystal Metheny. Ember winced. Crystal Metheny, who decided she was fit to be around children? Simone cocked an eyebrow. She's been clean for a while now, Ember, and we can't afford to be choosy when placing a child, especially a troubled one like April. Ember closed her mouth, mind swirling with anger. You were saying they were doing homework, Simone? Cedric interjected. Yes. Around 7 p.m., Crystal reported that April started speaking in a strange voice. She then demanded to be allowed to leave and return to her mother's house to collect a stuffed giraffe she calls Mr. Snuggles. When Crystal refused, April jabbed a pencil into her hand. Ember flinched away from the photos of Crystal's puncture wound. Cedric picked it up, his face crossed with a troubled frown. Do you think she mimicked the crucifixion on purpose, Simone? Maybe. If she were possessed by a demon or entity that conforms to Judeo-Christian archetypes. More likely, it was just a convenient target. Have you sensed the presence of a possessing entity, Simone? Ember asked. Simone pursed her lips. I'm not clear on that. As you said before, April has been through a lot. The Wraith used a dark magic ritual on her that left a taint. Took its toll. The girl's spirit might be primed to accept visitations now. What does that mean? Cedric asked. It means, Ember said grimly, leaning forward in her seat, that April is now a medium. What's a medium exactly in this context? Simone chuckled without much mirth. You should know, Sheriff. You married one. Ember shifted uncomfortably in her seat. A medium can see and talk to spirits. That's the most basic level of it. and as far as I'm willing to go. However, some mediums invite spirits to possess them. That sounds dangerous, Cedric said. Not always. Mongolian priestesses allow themselves to be possessed by nature spirits which offer guidance and wisdom. Many of the stories of the saints can be chalked up to possession by a benign but foreign spiritual power. In most cases, Simone said, steepling her fingers before her, Ember or I could exorcise the possessing entity. In April's case, that would be a temporary measure at best. She needs to be coerced into shutting the door in her mind that the being or beings uses to take control. How is that even going to work? Simone sighed. Not easily, and not overnight. It would require April being in a stable environment around foster parents with a strong understanding of magic and practice in the usage thereof. A marathon, not a sprint with the right people? Simone looked pointedly at Ember. Ember set her jaw hard and nodded firmly. I understand, Ember said. I don't. Cedric looked between them. What's going on? April is coming home with us, Ember said. Chapter 22. Ember glanced over at April as the first grader scribbled on a sketch pad in the back seat of the cruiser. How are you doing, kiddo? Good, April said, seeming as ordinary as could be. April, Cedric said, a bit gruffly to Ember's estimation. You know we have to talk about the way you hurt Mrs. Metheny. April stopped scribbling on her page. She returned to the task a moment later, filling the eye of a demonic-looking figure red. That wasn't me. That was Monkey Lock. It was you, April. It was your hand that did the deed. Legally, that makes you responsible. Monkey Lock doesn't like Crystal. April flashed her haunted eyes up at Ember. He doesn't like her at all. The radio grew staticky, drowning out the sounds of Huey Lewis and the news. Cedric fumbled with the knob until the music returned. Ember felt a strong swell of the presence inside of April when she talked about Crystal. In order to coax it out, she decided to continue that line of questioning. April, honey, why doesn't Monkalock like Crystal? April pursed her lips. I don't know. Do you like Crystal? April shrugged. April, you're not going to get in trouble for telling the truth, okay? Ember swallowed hard. Do you like Crystal? She yells a lot and she's mean, April said. She says she has a secret door in the basement where she locks up all the bad kids who didn't listen. Why doesn't Monkalock like Crystal? You should ask him that, April said, her lips turning into a frown. Why is that? April made a come-hither gesture with her hooked finger. Ember leaned in and April whispered into her ear with Cheeto-tinged breath. Because I'm not allowed to swear. Ember cocked an eyebrow. Does Monkeylock swear? He likes to smoke too. And he's bulletproof and doesn't have to follow anybody's rules. And he says if people are scared of me or don't like me, then that's their problem, not mine. Ember flinched. Cedric's face creased in alarm. Monkalock doesn't sound like a very nice person. Monkalock protected me and stayed with me when everybody else left, April said. I want him to be with me for always. The radio squealed, this time the static seeming to form electronic laughter. April, be careful saying things like that. Sometimes you can make pacts with people like Monkalock without knowing that's what you're doing. April frowned. What's a pact, Miss Ember? It's like a deal, a contract you make. Sometimes they're very, very hard to get out of. April's face contorted into a sneer, taking Ember aback with its scornful ferocity. Why don't you stop condescending to the kid for 5 seconds, barmaid? You're not Miss Perfect TV, Mom, so knock it off. Cedric gaped and nearly swerved off the road. Ember cocked an eyebrow and didn't flinch. Monkalock, I presume. No, just Monkalock, not Monkalock, I presume. Look, you're softballing everything for April when there's no need. There's darkness in the world she would be better off not knowing about until she's older, Ember said firmly. Monkalock laughed, bouncing up and down in April's body with glee. Darkness. April stared into the darkness itself, and the darkness stared into her. "You're talking about the Wraith's ritual," Ember said. "It did a lot more than just dye a streak of her hair white. April saw into what is, as far as your pitiful perspective is concerned, the bowels of hell itself. You think you're doing her a favor by being protective? You're not, and that's why she needs me. So there's one being in the entire universe who isn't lying to her." Ember chewed her lower lip. "You think you're helping her, don't you?" "Look, Chesty, I am helping her. Don't like that. Piss off." Munkalok fled deeper into April. The girl blinked several times, then picked up her paper and crayon. "You're going to have to exercise that thing right away," Cedric said. "It's not that simple, Cedric. April has to want Munkalok to leave, and it sounds like they've grown rather attached. All the more reason for you to get rid of it." "We'll talk about this later." Ember glanced worriedly at April. They pulled into the driveway of old Mickey's place. Formerly a worker in the salt mines, he'd used his retirement fund to buy 20 acres of land outside of town. Then he'd filled it up with barns and sheds and even tents filled with what most other folks called junk. Once in a while, the antique hunters would come around and he'd part with a few things. But for the most part, the old man was happy with his hoard. "April, do you want to see some cool old stuff?" "Yeah," April said, her eyes lighting up with childish glee for the first time Ember could remember. April skipped on ahead, peering into the sheds and gaping at the treasures within. Cedric hovered near Ember, his lips a thin, tight line. "She's awfully thin," Cedric said. "Sometimes possessing entities discourage their hosts from eating, but I don't think that's what's at play here. I hate to admit it, but cutting her off from Munkalok right now might do more harm than good." "I'm not sure I agree," Cedric said, his gaze growing hard. The approach of old Mickey caused him to soften his expression. "We'll talk about this later." Mickey hobbled up on a cane, offering his hand for a shake to both of them. "Hey, Sheriff. Hanky Bob says you might be interested in taking that old Dotson off my hands?" "Hanky Bob told you right. Lead the way." Old Mickey's wizened face contorted into a scowl. "Hey, girl, don't go touching that." April glanced over, one hand resting on an old-fashioned pump handle faucet. "Take it easy, Mickey. She's just a kid," Cedric said. "Kids today don't know the meaning of the word discipline." Mickey moved over toward April, waving his cane in the air. "Back in my day, we knew better than to go around just touching everything. Now get away from there. Go on, get." Munkalok sneered up at Mickey. "You get," he said in his raspy voice. "Oh dear," Ember said, belly tightening in knots. Chapter 23. Ember moved to intervene, a protective spell on her lips, knowing she'd never make it in time. Munkalok growled at Mickey, making a dismissive gesture with April's arm. Mickey lifted into the air and flew back as if he'd been plucked by giant invisible fingers. Ember finished her spell and stiffened the air molecules around Mickey's body until they clustered into a density relative of foam rubber. Mickey bounced along the dirt path until Cedric caught him, helping the old-timer to his feet. "Are you all right?" Cedric asked Mickey. "I think so," he said. "What happened? Did I fall again?" Ember felt a stab of guilt, but took the opportunity presented to her. "Yes, you did." "Well, serves me right for getting all worked up about a kid messing with my stuff," he said, shaking his head. "I seem to be all right this time. Last time, I dislocated my hip." "You're a lucky man, Mickey," Cedric said. "Come on, April," Ember said, taking April's hand. "Let's not touch Mickey's things without permission." "Let go of me, barmaid," Munkalok hissed. "Get control of yourself or I'll banish you." "You don't want to do that. Besides, that man was scaring April. That doesn't mean he deserves to get hurt. I was protecting her from him." "You need to learn about scale. And stop digging her fingernails into my hand. That's playground nonsense and you and I are too old for it." Munkalok's face twisted into a grin. "Ha. You're right, witch. We shouldn't have to fight. We should be able to coexist. Prove it by leaving right now, and don't come back until we're back at my house. Understand?" Munkalok grimaced. "Fine." He fled from April's features. Ember breathed a sigh of relief as Mickey led them to the Datsun chassis. To Ember's eyes, it didn't look like much. Rusted and old, just the shell of a small pickup truck without engine, wheels, headlights, or much of anything, really. Yet Cedric and Mickey talked excitedly about the frame as if it were buried treasure. "You've already got the wheel width you need to get plenty of torque for your money," Mickey said. "Plus, she'll take a much bigger engine than factory standard." "They built them to last in the 1980s, that's for sure," Cedric said. "How much do you want for it?" $2,000 and she's yours." Cedric flinched. $2,000? That seems a little steep. I can find one in much better condition on the internet for a third of that or less. "Yeah, but Hanky Bob said you needed it yesterday. Supply and demand, my boy." April frowned. "That bad man is trying to cheat the sheriff." It's all right, they're negotiating. It's a thing people do when they buy or sell things." "I think he's mean." Ember sighed, crouching down beside April. She remembered what Munkalok had said about not condescending to the child. "April, you're going to run into a lot of mean people in your life. It's sad, but true. You have to learn to deal with them without letting their meanness get to you. It's part of growing up." "Why are so many people mean?" April asked, her waifish face a mask of despair. "Oh, honey," Ember said, hugging the girl tightly. "I don't know. I wish I did. But there's nice people too. And sometimes the nicest people seem mean at first. Everyone's fighting something, April. You just have to fight a little harder than most." Ember held her at arm's length. April pursed her lips. "It's hard to be nice, isn't it?" "Sometimes, but when you're nice, you get a little glow in your belly letting you know you're doing the right thing." "I've never seen a glow." "It's something you feel but can't see." Ember straightened up. "Would you like to walk back to the car?" "Yes, please," April said. Ember turned around to face Cedric and Mickey. "I'm taking her back to the car." "Okay," Cedric said with a nod. He turned back to Mickey. 300, and that's my final offer." "You're ripping me off, Sheriff." "Hardly. I'm paying you 100 more than the listed price in the Blue Book. You're getting a good deal, and you know it." Ember took April back to the car. They got her fruit snacks out of the back seat and sat in the shade. April ate her snacks, feet kicking under her as she sat on an old wooden fence. "Ms. LeBeau said I was going to an orphanage," April said. "Well, what would you think about coming home with me and Sheriff Cedric?" Ember asked hopefully. "Just for a little while. It's totally up to you." April scrunched up her face in query. "You'd let me come stay with you?" "Until we could find you a forever home, sweetie," Ember said. "We'd love to have you." April nodded. "Okay." Ember smiled, but it drained away when Munkalok took control. "No way am I moving in with a cop and a witch," he said. "Period. End of story." "Here we go again," Ember said, rolling her eyes. Chapter 24. Ember crossed her arms over her chest and glared at Munkalok. "Your threats don't mean anything to me, Munkalok. You're a minor entity at best, and you've already said your focus is to protect, not harm, your host." "We don't see eye to eye on what's best for April," Munkalok sneered, "and I'll show you a minor entity." Ember felt the shadow that was Munkalok's essence bleed away from April. She watched as it raced up the slope to where Cedric and Mickey still haggled about the chassis. She swallowed hard as Munkalok embedded himself into the chassis. It leaped off the large tree it had leaned against, growing wheels composed of shadow stuff. A phantom engine rumbled as it raced down the hill toward Ember. "You know what? Car's all yours," Mickey said, turning on his heel. "I must have hit my head when I fell. That or I've been drinking too much hooch." Ember gaped in astonishment as the phantom hot rod burned its ethereal rubber and tore up the ground as it bore down on her. Munkalok's theatrics notwithstanding, The car had enough weight to cause her injury if it hit. She could throw herself to the side between the sheds where the car could not fit. Ember didn't like that notion, however. She thought it prudent to establish boundaries with Munkalok right away. If she fled or acted afraid, that might encourage further bad behavior from the possessing sprite. Ember needed to humble Munkalok. She summoned to mind a dispel that would sever the connection between the physical realm and the spiritual. The demonic hot rod bore down on her, less than 15 feet away and gaining speed. Ember flicked her hands out, palms facing outward, and uttered the command words. A red nimbus exuded from her hands, growing into a flabby, thick disc which enveloped the speeding car. Instantly, the phantom wheels and engine faded into smoke and mist. The frame hit the ground and dug in, leaving gouts of earth up behind until it came to a rest a few feet from Ember. Ember straightened up and brushed dirt from her hair. Munkalok would be unable to manifest for some time, and would have difficulty taking over April's body even if she remained willing. She returned to April and found the girl sitting against the fence, her eyes wide open as if in a trance. "April!" Ember shook her gently. April blinked several times until her eyes focused on Ember. "Oh, Miss Ember, am I still going home with you? Munkalok doesn't like you, but I do." Ember smiled. "Yes, of course you can still come home with us." Cedric jogged up, gazing at the chassis mired in the dirt before rushing up to Ember's side. "Are you all right?" "We're both fine," Ember said, looking at the chassis. "Did your car break?" "No, the frame is pretty tough." Cedric chuckled. "Anyway, it's not like the hot rod has to win or anything. Just get our foot in the door, so to speak." On the way back to their house, Ember told Cedric of her encounter with Munkalok, up to the possession of the car. "I want her to stay with us for a while, Cedric," Ember said. "And I told you we'd discuss it." "So this is us discussing it," Ember said. Cedric sighed. "I don't like it. We have enough problems navigating our, situation without adding a foster kid to the mix." "She needs us, Cedric. However much we're in turmoil, it's even worse for her." Ember looked over her shoulder into the back seat, where April slumbered, snoring softly. She just lost her mother, and her father is a known killer, not to mention the dark ritual Cassandra's wraith had performed on her. She needs us. "So I think she'd be better off with a couple who aren't as busy as we are," Cedric said. "You've barely been opening the bar lately because you've been running around with me solving murders and trying to get my memory back." Ember sighed. "Are you really going to use the bar against me?" "No, of course not." Cedric frowned. I'm still getting used to the idea that I'm married at all, let alone can't remember it. I'm not sure I'm ready or willing to be a parent. I'm not sure that I ever will be." Ember flinched, turning a hurt gaze on him. "That's not what you said before you lost your memory." "Well, maybe it was like the tractor pulls and Hanky Bob. Maybe I kept it to myself so I wouldn't upset you." Ember leaned back in her seat, stunned to hear Cedric say such things. Being a parent had been one of the goals they'd discussed. She thought Cedric would make a fantastic father, in point of fact, no matter his reservations. Ember believed she could be a good mother with a lot of effort. Why would Cedric want to shut the door so firmly in the face of having children? When he lost his memories, perhaps he lost a part of himself as well. A tenderness she had helped engender and coax out of him, nurturing his more caring side. "Hey, I'm sorry," Cedric said. "I shouldn't have said that. The truth is, I'm scared I won't measure up to what April needs. Sorry for taking it out on you." Ember forced her tone to remain civil when she spoke. "I understand that, but it's time to step up, protect and serve, remember?" Cedric glanced over his shoulder at the slumbering April and sighed. "Yes, I remember, protect and serve. She looks so fragile when she's sleeping." "Yes, it's hard to believe there's a monster hiding underneath." "And we're bringing it into our home," Cedric said. Ember had no response other than to hope they found Ash, and soon. The unfinished business had really begun to pile up. Chapter 25. The moon rose, bringing not silver majesty, but a sickly yellow pallor to the nightscape. Ember shuffled about the kitchen, tending to the leftovers from dinner as Cedric set up the guest bedroom for April's use upstairs. April sat nearby coloring on her pages. Ember thought she was a bit above average in skill, depicting more complete images than many children her age. April primarily drew pictures of her mother listening to headphones in heaven. Sometimes she drew herself and Munkalak holding hands and cavorting about, frolicking like rabbits in a Disney cartoon. The depiction of Munkalak was particularly of interest. He had a short, squat body, the upper half human and the lower half that of a goat, or maybe a pig. Munkalak's bald dome was crowned by a pair of curling horns. A wood spirit of some sort? That brought her some measure of relief. The more sinister spirits didn't have such a genial countenance. Not that wood spirits couldn't also pose a threat. Their lack of understanding when it came to human affairs, mingled with their magical power, could cause disasters. All she had to do was recall the phantom hot rod speeding toward her, engine roaring with the flames of Hades, to remember how dangerous Munkalak could be. "What's Sheriff Cedric up to, Miss Ember?" April asked. "He's getting your bedroom set up for you, sweetie." "Oh." April went back to coloring. "Do you have any acrylic paints? Miss Crystal used to let us paint with acrylic." "I don't think so, but I'm sure we can get you some. I thought Miss Crystal was mean." "Not all the time. She was always really nice after she got up from her naps." "She took a lot of naps?" "Yes, she was a very tired person. Her eyes were always red, and she talked like she was half asleep. Oh, and she had a funny smell about her when she got back from a nap." Ember chuckled. She could well imagine what actually went on during Crystal's naps. Well, at least it wasn't meth. "Nobody is all good or all bad," Ember said. "We've all got both of those things inside of us." "I've got Munkalak inside of me. He keeps the bad things away." Ember pursed her lips, seating herself beside the child. "It's nice of Mr. Munkalak to take care of you, April. But sooner or later, you have to feel sad things. You can't just bottle them up." "Why would I want to feel sad things?" Ember picked up a crayon and sketched on a blank piece of paper. She made a grapevine design with teardrop-shaped leaves. "No one wants to feel sad things, April. People who lose their husbands don't want to feel sad. Sometimes we need to feel sad so we can get better." "Like when I'm sad because I miss my mom?" Ember nodded, putting a hand on top of April's shoulders. "Uh-huh, just like that. It hurts a lot right now, but eventually it won't hurt as bad." "But it will always hurt?" Ember pursed her lips. "Yes, but the good memories will eventually more than make up for the hurt. Eventually, you'll be able to think of your mother and smile." April covered her face, shoulders shaking with sobs. Ember put her arm around April and the girl huddled against her. Cedric came downstairs, his face creased with worry. Ember shook her head slightly when he opened his mouth to speak. Cedric pointed at the garage. "I'll just go get the cot." He headed out into the garage while Ember comforted April. She stroked the girl's long hair while Cedric banged and thumped around in the garage. A moment later, he returned, carrying the cot in its folded configuration. April looked up out of tear-streaked eyes as he passed. "Aren't you guys married?" "Yes, we are." "Then why doesn't he sleep with you?" Ember stiffened up a little bit. "That's complicated." "That's what grown-ups say when they don't want to explain." Ember sighed, remembering what Munkalak had said about condescending to April. "Sheriff Cedric's memories got stolen, so he doesn't remember me. He forgot we got married." "Who stole his memories?" Ember was taken aback at how readily April believed her. "A bad witch, but she forgot where she hid them. I don't know how to find his memories." April shrugged. "Munkalak can find them. Munkalak can find anything." Ember opened her mouth, then shut it. As desperate as she was to find out where Cedric's memories had gone, she didn't want to pressure an already traumatized, exhausted child before bedtime. April stifled another yawn, and Ember's conscience won out. "Let's get you to bed, huh?" April nodded, rubbing her eyes. Ember tucked April into the guest bed, and the child went out like a light. Ember stroked her soft cheek, then headed back into the master bedroom. Cedric was setting up the cot in the living room downstairs. She could hear every creak and dissatisfied grunt as his weight settled upon it. Ember listened to him roll and rattle around for over an hour before she flung the covers off of herself and padded to the top of the stairs. Cedric? Yes? He answered after a moment's hesitation. Just come sleep in the big bed. You know that cot hurts your back. The cot's fine. Ember put her hands on her hips. It's not fine, and you're not going to be much use to me or April if you're grunting and groaning and sore all day tomorrow. We're adults. We can share a bed. Fine. Cedric rose from the cot and padded up the stairs into view. He followed her into the bedroom and awkwardly clambered onto the mattress. See? California King means plenty of room. Ember nestled in to sleep. Unlike previous nights, she drifted right off to slumber. When she awoke in the morning, it was with Cedric nestled up behind her, curling his body around her own as he'd used to. Ember sighed, snuggled in, and decided to enjoy the moment. Cedric's breathing changed. Ember knew he was awake, yet he didn't move. He didn't scoot away or make protestations to right and proper modesty. He just laid there with her, and in that moment, Ember found it enough. Chapter 26. Sage stood on Ember's porch, the fading sunlight giving a reddish cast to her dark hair. The bat shifter listened as Ember explained the unique conditions she might experience babysitting April. If she starts talking in a weird voice or stuff starts floating, call me right away. I've had some experience with possessing entities, Ember. I'll be fine. You need to focus on infiltrating the hot rodders, remember? It's your best bet of finding Ash. Ember nodded, tight-lipped. I just hope this hot rod Hanky Bob is putting together doesn't explode. Ha, I'm sure it'll be fine. Say, are you planning on going dressed like that? Ember looked down at herself. She had on a pair of snug denim jeans, ranch-style boots, and a black blouse with flared sleeves. What's wrong with what I'm wearing? There's a standard to maintain. Here, let me Google you some images. Ember's face turned red as she beheld the screen. Sage, you can't be serious. I can see that girl's underwear. That's the point. I don't have the figure to pull this off. You actually do, but you don't have the confidence. They're going to smell you coming a mile away and mark you as a narc. So there has to be a happy medium where I won't feel like a streetwalker, but bring them, to use the parlance of our times, swag. Just try to dress a little flashier. Fine. Ember looked at herself and muttered the words to a glamour cantrip. The laws of physics bent and stretched to her whims as Ember reshaped her clothing to something more party-centric. Her jeans turned into black leather pants, the boots grew steeper heels, and her blouse grew lace accents on the sleeves and shiny silver buttons. Ember adjusted to show a slight amount of cleavage, then presented herself to Sage. Good enough, I guess, Sage said. At least you don't look like the cornpone chick you are. I'll show you cornpone, Ember said with a grin. Thanks again for taking care of April. If anything goes wrong, call me. I'm sure we'll be fine, Ember. Be careful. Always, Ember shouted back as she headed down the steps to the driveway, where Cedric awaited her. Let's hope Hanky Bob's pulled it together in so short a time, Cedric said. As long as it doesn't explode, Ember replied. He chuckled and cocked an eyebrow at her new attire. You look nice. Thanks, Ember said, cheeks gaining a blush. They drove out to Hanky Bob's place. Ember smiled when she saw Hanky Bob and his crew hanging around a tarp-covered car, holding beers in their hands. When Cedric pulled to a stop, the men all adopted solemn expressions, like the burghers of Calais. Hanky Bob shuffled up to Cedric, literally holding his hat in his hand. I want you to know, Cedric, we did the best we could with what he had on hand, but unfortunately we couldn't meet the expectations for this project. Cedric frowned, stroking his chin with his fingers. Does it at least start up? Hanky Bob sighed and patted Cedric's shoulder sadly. He moved over to the tarp and gripped it. Well, if you really must know, we didn't meet your expectations because... He whipped the tarp off with a flourish. We freaking exceeded them. The crew laughed and applauded. Cedric's eyes went wide as he beheld the hot rod. Somewhere under all the bling, paint, and chrome lay the original Datsun chassis. It didn't resemble a pickup truck any longer, but a futuristic spacecraft that happened to have wheels. Purple with a black and white leopard pattern along the trim, there was no way anyone would mistake it for a police vehicle. "This is amazing, Hanky Bob." "Isn't it? Here, you better get going." Hanky Bob handed him the keys. "I hear there's a big race in town." Cedric hugged Hanky Bob as Ember climbed into the souped-up lowrider truck. The interior was done up in purple fake fur. She chuckled as Cedric folded his lanky form into the small cabin. "This is why all racers are usually small guys," Ember said. "Don't ruin this for me," Cedric said in jest. "I finally get to live out my Dukes of Hazzard fantasies." Well, I'm not saying you shouldn't have some fun. I am saying you need to remember we're doing this to find Ash, and hopefully catch a killer." "You don't think it's Olbermann?" "I'm not assuming anything, but the more I think about it, the more I think he's a poor fit. Right now, the theory I'm leaning toward is Ash has been possessed or otherwise compromised by an otherworldly entity. With the bridge between dimensions weakened because of all the dark magic in the last few years, it stands to reason. Unless Ash has gone bad, which neither of us can believe," Cedric said. "We'll find her, Ember. I promise." The car rumbled to life. Cedric applied the gas and they tore out of the gravel lot like their life depended on it. Cedric shifted with adroit flashes of his hand, a big smile forcing its way to his lips. "Yahoo! Hanky Bob, you outdone yourself on this one. Listen to that mechanical precision when she shifts." "It is a very, fast ride," Ember said. She was glad of the safety belt and airbag Cedric had insisted upon, even though they added weight to the vehicle. Her hand gripped the fear strap above the passenger side window for much of the trek to the old salt mines. "Jackpot," Cedric said as they pulled up on a large gathering of people, focused around a profusion of cars. Industrial lighting had been set up, providing a surprising amount of illumination. "They have generators for their lighting," Ember said in awe, "and trucks to haul all their equipment away, even professional-looking camera crews. These guys aren't just goofing around." "No, they are not. Let's hope they'll accept us." A pair of men in baggy jeans approached Cedric as he pulled the Datsun to a halt. Cedric rolled the window down and peered out, plastering a smile on his face. "Hey there, homies," Cedric said. "I heard y'all were doing some wicked awesome races tonight, and I thought I'd take old PPE here for a spin. See if I can't win up some glory. What do you say? Can I join your hallowed ranks of street racers?" Ember slapped a hand over her face. She should have insisted on doing the talking. The two men drew submachine guns and leveled them through the window. So is that a no?" Chapter 27. Ember glared over Cedric, matching the gunman's gaze spark for spark. "Don't mind him, honey," she said, trying to put a little bit more Louisiana twang in her voice than normally present. "He's just afraid he's going to lose." "I never lose." He glared down at them, though the gun lowered toward the ground. "I'm Jim Mack. Ask anyone. I'm the fastest and most furious." "Then how come you've never beaten Motorhead Krebs?" the man next to him said. Ember's brow furrowed. Something familiar about the name Krebs. "Hey, screw you, all right?" Mac looked back at Cedric and waved him on. "Yeah, go ahead. Might as well be more people for me to beat." "For Motorhead Krebs to beat, you mean?" his companion called. Cedric parked in an empty spot a good walk from the main festivities. As they exited the hot rod, a sound of thunder roared up from the track. Two cars sped off into the night, shooting fire out of their exhaust. "They must have a dual head in there," Cedric murmured. Ember slipped her arm into his. "Come on, homie, we need to get to work." They mingled into the crowd, separating as they went to cover more ground. All about the abandoned road, a collection of gearheads, gangbangers, and misfits alternately drank, cheered, or talked at loud volume with each other. It was clear the races were only part of the appeal. It was a social club of sorts. It caused Ember to reminisce about the days when she'd had a coven in high school. An idea occurred to her. What if she could get Simone and several others together for a coven? Maybe even Beulah. No, that was probably reaching too far. Ember forced herself to focus. Ash had come across the medallion somehow. If they couldn't find her with an eyeball canvas of the event, they'd switch to more aggressive tactics like showing her picture. While effective, it would also tip off anyone who might be holding Ash against her will. Or Ash herself, if she truly had fallen to the dark side of magic. Ember made it halfway through the milling throng by the time the cars came rumbling back. Still, she'd seen no sign of Ash. The crowd was large, in the several hundreds at least, and more people seemed to be arriving all the time. Ember dug out her cell phone and called Cedric. "Have you seen any sign of Ash yet?" "No, I'm afraid not." "Me neither. I'm going to make one more pass, and then I guess we have to resort to asking around. Let's hope doing so doesn't put Ash in more danger." Ember's voice trailed off as she laid eyes on Ash. Her hair had been done up in a purple and black rave cut, and her garments closely matched those of the girls Sage had shown her. She stood with her arm thrown around the bull neck of a seated shirtless man, leaning her weight against him. Ember estimated the man's size at just under 7 feet. An aging but powerful brawler's physique, covered with tattoos, made him seem imposing even while seated. He sat beside a bright red muscle car. To her inexperienced eyes, it looked like a 1970s model. "Cedric," she said over the phone. "I've just spotted Ash, over by the red muscle car." "The Plymouth Hemicuda?" Cedric asked. "I don't know, it's huge and it's red and it has a spoiler, and I'm going to talk to Ash right now." Ember hung up the phone and stalked over the pavement to the little gaggle of people surrounding Ash and the large man. Suddenly, a muscular man with a shiny bald head interposed himself between her and Ash. "Where you think you're going, Sister Leatherpants?" The other bodyguard laughed. Ember peered around him and pointed at Ash. "I'm just here to talk to my sister Ash. That's her right there. Ash? Hey." Ash turned her head, eyes locking with Ember's for a moment. Then Ash shrugged, laughed, and went back to hanging on every word the big man said, while hanging on him literally. "Ash? Yeah. Everyone's a friend of Motorhead Krebs. Get to stepping, sister." "Yeah, Sister Leatherpants." Numbly, Ember let them shove her a few feet away. She looked past them at Ash, who seemed so different than the sister she knew. Maybe Ash was possessed? Was that why she hadn't recognized Ember? Ember shook her head, the awful truth dawning on her. When an entity possessed a living host, it was privy to all that its host knew. The information highway did not run both ways, which was one of the reasons Ember couldn't completely trust Munkalak. If Ash were possessed, then the entity should still have recognized Ember. That meant an awful, horrid possibility slowly dawned on her. What if Ash's memories of Ember had been stolen, just like Cedric's? Chapter 28. Ember ran into Cedric as he sidled his way through the crowd. 2 more cars bolted off into the darkness, drowning out what he said the first time. "What was that?" Ember asked, the acrid tang of burned rubber searing her nostrils. "I said, did you talk to Ash yet?" Ember looked up at him, into the handsome face she'd come to know so well. All she wanted was to be back in his arms, snuggled up in bed as they had been that morning. She suddenly clutched him, wrapping her arms around his midsection tightly. "Hey," Cedric said, his arms encircling her. "What's wrong?" "Cedric, Ash didn't—" She pulled away so she was no longer mumbling into his chest. "Ash didn't recognize me. At all. I couldn't even get close because of her new boyfriend's bodyguards/thugs." Cedric frowned as he gazed over the heads of the crowd at the red Hemicuda. "Is that the boyfriend? The guy with the lead sled?" "If you mean the big red car, then yes." "I mean the big red car." Cedric ran a hand down his face, clearly lost in thought. How common is memory-erasing magic? "Rather uncommon, actually," Ember admitted. "Could it be you're just especially sensitive to the use of memory magic at the moment, and you're drawing conclusions which may not be correct?" Ember's face twisted into a scowl. Are you trying to minimize my concerns? Cedric held his hands up. Not at all. I'm just saying, maybe there are other possibilities we should look into. Like what? Cedric cocked an eyebrow. She could be undercover and can't show even a glimmer of recognition. I'm here to tell you, from personal experience, when your memory is stolen, you still feel like you should know the total stranger in front of you. Trust me, she'd have reacted. Ember took a deep breath and let it out slowly. All right. I'll stop trying to think the absolute worst thing. Still, how do we breach that inner circle? Cedric grinned. We win the grand finale, the salt mine circuit. Don't we have to be entered in something like that ahead of time, Cedric? Ember asked, crossing her arms over her chest. Yes, Cedric said. I just registered us. If we win, it's a guaranteed ticket into the Popular Girls Club. I never got along with the popular girls, Ember said. It was usually me sitting around with the other goofballs way in the back. Well, then this should be fun. Cedric raced back to their car. Ember noticed the glittered silver letters PPD stylized on the hood. What does PPD stand for? Cedric turned red. Purple something destroyer. Ember covered her mouth with her hand as laughter blurted from her tightly pressed lips. She gradually gave in to her mirth and doubled over in lusty guffaws. You are such a boy sometimes, Ember said with a sigh. It's a good thing you're good-looking. She kissed his cheek and patted his belly, enjoying the smooth knots of muscle playing under his shirt. Ember climbed into the car and helped Cedric do his pre-race check. Mostly, it was a lot of jargon that didn't seem to make much sense to her. She wondered if this was the way Cedric felt when she was trying to explain magic to him. Cedric pronounced their vehicle ready to drive. He glanced over at her and cleared his throat. How much do you weigh? Ember's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? I need to calibrate the shocks based on how much of a load I have in the passenger seat. Ember rolled her eyes. I don't know. I stopped weighing myself when we got married. But on the other hand, I've been doing a lot of running around. I'm going to guess 125, 130. Cedric reddened. Sorry, I know a gentleman's never supposed to ask. You're my husband. You don't always have to be a gentleman. Ember grinned. Is there a starting line for this race? They taxied the PPD into position on a straight white line, which also bore Krebs and his hemikuda, as well as 4 other competitors. Do you recognize any of these people? Oh yeah, Hanky Bob follows the Sons of the Wheel. He's a subscriber to the official podcast. Cedric pointed at a Dodge Ram built up with what Ember thought of as mudding wheels, almost like a mini monster truck. That's Stone Chill and the Street Stomper. He seldom wins but has over 10 million Instagram followers. He cheats. Cedric gestured at a Volkswagen Beetle, yellow in hue, and souped out with a spoiler and mag rims. That's Yellow Jacket, a female driver who has even more Instagram followers than Stone Chill. And don't get me started on how popular her OnlyFans channel is. Finally, we already know Mr. Motorhead Krebs and his hemikuda. How good of a chance do we have of winning? Ember cocked an eyebrow. Honestly? Cedric cleared his throat and looked uncomfortable. Ah, well, they're all professional drivers and I haven't had a chance to take PPD for a spin yet. Cedric, Ember ran a hand down her face and sighed. Remember how Monkey Lock said don't condescend to April? Well, don't condescend to me. Cedric heaved a heavy sigh. Our chances of victory are somewhere between snowball in hell and slim to none. Then how is this plan supposed to get us into the inner circle? Ember's eyes widened. Cedric Jameson, shame on you. You just wanted to enter the race. Cedric winced. Can you forgive me? Ember rolled her eyes to the sky. I'll do you one better. With a little help from my magic, you're going to win this race. Chapter 29. The scantily clad young woman strutted across the pavement in front of the line of rumbling street racers. She faced the cars head-on, standing between the Yellow Jacket and Stone Chill, A rag in her hand fluttered in the wind, along with her long, thick, wavy hair. She might as well be naked, Ember remarked. At least they guarantee everyone's eyes are on her, Cedric said. He shook his head and glanced over at her sheepishly. I'm sorry. You were always allowed to find other women attractive, Cedric, just so long as you came home to me. Ember grinned. I don't see any need to alter that arrangement, though I do have to ask, what makes her so appealing? I feel like this is a trap, Cedric mutters, gripping the purple steering wheel. No trap, honest, I just really want to know. Well, Cedric said, clearing his throat. She has, that is, healthy skin, and her lips are nice, and her figure is, shall we say ample? Ember rolled her eyes. You're such a dork sometimes. I thought that would be a lot more fun than it turned out to be. She flashed her gaze over to him. So, if I paraded around in a skirt so short my underwear was constantly showing, with my breasts hanging out on a shelf, would you find that attractive? Cedric's face scrunched up with thought. In the confines of our own abode, absolutely. The girl threw the scarf toward the ground, waving it wildly about and jumping up and down. As one, the cars surged forward. The PPD took an early lead, mostly because Ember had solidified the air in front of the competitors. They would have to push against the equivalent of a gale force wind until they moved through it. If I recall, there's a pretty sharp right turn up ahead here, Cedric said. No, it's a sharp left. I'm pretty sure it's a right. Ember gritted her teeth. While you were hanging out with the popular kids, us unpopular kids were out here at the old salt mines. It's a left. Trust me. Cedric only paused a moment longer before slowing down and listing to the left. He grunted in appreciation as the sharp left turn came up out of nowhere. Thanks. Aren't you glad you listened? Yes. What were you doing out here in the salt mines anyway? Drinking beer, playing loud music our parents hated and casting spells. You know, angsty teen witch stuff. Cedric chuckled. The truth is, I was never one of the popular kids either. I was the only wolf shifter in town, so I felt isolated. Used to go on long runs through the wilderness in my wolf form instead of hanging out with the cool people. Ember chuckled. I didn't know that. Careful, the road splits up ahead, and the easier path is the upper level. That leads to a rickety bridge, though. That bridge is a lot safer than the rock drop zone, where boulders seem to magically appear on the road out of thin air. Upper level it is, Cedric said. As they approached the divide, headlights from the other competitors shone in their rearview mirror. Our early lead is vanishing, Cedric said. I don't suppose you have any more magic. I do, but I don't want to do anything that makes people wreck and get hurt. Cedric frowned. Then I guess you won't be flattening their tires. Hang on, Ember said. I can cast a Speed of the Sloth spell in a zone configuration behind us. That sounds effective. It is, and it shouldn't harm anyone. Ember cast the spell, concentrating on the image of a tree sloth moving slowly, breathing slowly, living slowly. The first car, the yellow jacket, hit the zone of sloth speed and dropped to a third its previous velocity. It's working! The Hemikuta hit the zone, slowed for a second, but took off rapidly again. How come it's not working on him? Ember griped. I don't know, you're the expert on magic, I just drive the car. I was thinking out loud. I'm starting to suspect there's more to our friend Krebs than meets the eye. Hang on, Cedric said. Strap in, we're about to hit the bridge. Ember turned around and grabbed the Jisoo strap over the passenger side window as Cedric accelerated. The engine throbbed so powerfully she could feel it in her bones and see the hood vibrating like a bumblebee's wings. The Hemikuta raced up next to them. Ember glanced over, seeing Krebs's eyes laser-focused on the road ahead. Ash glanced over at Ember, then quickly looked away. Was there a glimmer of recognition in her eyes? Ember couldn't be sure she had seen it or simply seen what she wanted to. He's trying to beat us to the bridge, Cedric said. Too bad Hanky Bob hooked us up with a little bit of laughing gas. Cedric hit the NO2 switch, and the PPD surged forward so swiftly they were plastered back in their seats. For a few seconds, they raced ahead of Krebs and his CUDA. Then the CUDA's engine whine changed pitch. The car surged forward, easily passing them as if they were standing still. Black, oily exhaust spilled from the exhaust pipes as the CUDA laid them to waste. "Son of a gun," Cedric swore as the CUDA disappeared across the bridge. "Not only did he beat us to the bridge, he smoked us." Ember's eyes narrowed. "Still, second place is pretty good. Maybe we've earned an audience with the so-called inner circle at last." Chapter 30. Ember declined to cast any more spells to help Cedric win the race, preferring to save her energy for a possible confrontation with Krebs. The familiar smell she'd detected in his exhaust had gotten her to thinking. She felt in her pocket at the bit of calendar Ash had scribbled on. "We're going to come in last," Cedric lamented as the yellow jacket buzzed past them. "Never mind the race. What was it you called the Plymouth CUDA?" "A lead sled?" Ember gasped, her eyes going wide. "Cedric, I know who the mushroom killer is." "You're certain?" "Dead certain. We need to follow Ash. Don't let her get away." They brought up the rear as Motorhead Krebs' posse celebrated joyously. So joyously, in fact, they didn't notice Krebs wasn't joyous at all. Quite the opposite, in fact. He stood leaning under the open hood of the CUDA. Dark indigo smoke wafted all around his face. Ember noted he held a gas mask over his face. "Stop, quick," Ember said. Ash hovered near Krebs, her eyes full of worry. Ember got out and worked her way through the celebration toward her sister. She caught their voices over the din of the partying racers. "Burned up the piston and cracked the cinder block, you stupid cow." Krebs stood up, getting his face within an inch of Ash's. "You said that fancy fungus was going to work without a hitch." Ash's voice had the slightest bit of a tremor in it. "I said it would probably work, and that there was a 15% chance of cracking the block or throwing a rod. You chose to race anyway." The massive bodyguard got in Ember's way. Ember glared up at him, her eyes narrowed to slits. "You don't want to be between me and my sister right now." She laid her hand on his arm and chanted a few words. The bodyguard found himself vomiting up a squirming mass of night crawlers. He bent over, hands cupped over his mouth, retching over and over, but there seemed no end to the worms erupting from his throat. At least to his perspective. The simple illusion tricked his mind, and the party was so wild, most people didn't even notice the man's distress. Ember moved past the panicking man to see Krebs with his fingers around Ash's throat. Ember slowed, waiting for a sign from Ash on how to act. "You broke my ride, witch," Krebs sputtered. Ash didn't bat an eye. "I can fix your ride. I just need to get back to the altar." Krebs shoved her back by her throat, releasing her to stumble and cough a few feet before slamming into the yellow jacket. "Let's get out of here," Krebs muttered, grabbing Ash's arm in his monkey paw grip. Ember grabbed Cedric's hand. "Come on, we have to get back to the car. We have to follow them, Cedric." Okay, Cedric said, offering no argument. He led her back to the PPD, and they climbed in swiftly. He followed Krebs's taillights as the shirtless man and Ash departed the scene. "Careful not to follow too close," Ember said. "Krebs is paranoid, and with good reason. He's been abusing the fairy's Death's head caps." "How can you tell?" "Simple. He out-accelerated you even after you used your nitrous oxide, and I detected the smell on the exhaust." Ember ticked off her points on her fingers. "Secondly, his behavior is telling. Aggressive, xenophobic, agitated. He's suffering the affects of FDH addiction. Why would anyone take poisonous mushrooms enough to get addicted? Because taken in extremely small increments can result in a hallucinogenic, euphoric state. It's also rumored to strengthen the magic of witches and warlocks who consume it." "Does it work?" Ember shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. The important thing is, Krebs thinks it works for him." "How's he driving it with a cracked block?" "My dad drove a truck with a cracked block for a couple of months. It's not the death sentence people think it is. Being down a piston means he's probably running badly, though." "That's probably why he's going so slow," Cedric said. Or he's on to us. I knew you were getting too close. Krebs suddenly tore off the main road, plunging into the darkness of the unlit highway. Cedric followed, finding a gravel path barely wide enough to qualify as a driveway. They thumped hard over the sudden dip and crackled along the gravel road after Krebs's taillights. He stopped. I think I see a house up ahead. Cedric glanced over at her, a pained expression on his face. Are you sure you're up to this? Ember cocked an eyebrow. What's that supposed to mean? Well, Cedric arched an eyebrow. I thought Ash was responsible for the toxic mushrooms. Ember gave him a grim, silent stare. Come on, let's get this over with. Chapter 31. Ember kept the protective ward up as she and Cedric crept along the rock-strewn path toward Krebs's home. The two-story postmodern home was spacious, if in poor repair. No lights glowed from inside of the dwelling. I'll check it out. Cedric shifted into his wolf form, dropping to all fours and giving his great shaggy form a twisting shake. Cedric padded silently up the steps, his nose snuffling the ground. Ember watched his progress. Her eyes widened when she saw the glow of a mind spell. Cedric, wait! Cedric paused, too late. His paw struck the outer edge of the magical ward. A semicircle of greenish light emanated up around his wolf form. Cedric cried out, then twisted around on the ground until he adopted his human guise once more. His howl died into a whine, then a human gasp. Cedric? Ember raced over to him. Are you all right? To her relief, he still breathed. Cedric's eyes fluttered open. I think so. Just need a minute. Ember cast a quick mind-clouding spell on Cedric. Anyone who looked at him with the intent to harm would be unable to see him clearly. She kissed the top of his head. Pull yourself together. I'll keep looking. Ember raced up the shallow steps, hopping over the mind spells when she came upon them. A reddish energy web blocked the front door. Ember's eyes narrowed. It was a binding spell which would have held her in place while a weak but steady flame would slowly sear her flesh from her bones. It was a dark magic spell which prompted Ember to take greater caution. She kept her shield at the ready as her left hand opened, palm facing upward. Ember summoned a magical missile known as Ajax's Seer to her hand. It crackled with energy and would hit any target she sent it at. However, she could only summon one per day, and, if she didn't throw it within a few minutes, the backlash could cause her injury. Ash? Ember called out. Oh, she can't hear you, Krebs said, appearing in the doorway across the living space from Ember. She's a little bit tied up at the moment. He doubled over, laughing at his own joke. Krebs sucked on a vape, the end lighting up and flashing. He spewed out a cloud of indigo smoke, then immediately doubled over coughing. You're killing yourself with that stuff, Krebs, Ember called out. Just like you killed those poor people who ate at the buffet provided by Olbermann. Krebs's sweating face contorted into a sneer. Olbermann? That man is a swine. I had intended for him to eat the salad, but the jerkwad was on a paleo cleanse. I figured if a few of his party guests dropped dead, it would reflect bad on him in any case. Ember glared. You killed people just to make a businessman look bad? So what? They're just insects anyway. Once Ash unlocked the power of the Death's Head caps, I took my first steps to immortality. Ember pursed her lips, feeling genuine pity for him. You only think that they're making you stronger, Krebs. How did you convince my sister to hurt people? Krebs scowled. I didn't. She tried to betray me by keeping the dosage of Death's Head caps small enough to be non-lethal. Fortunately, I intervened without her knowledge. It's a shame Olbermann didn't succumb, but I'll get him yet. He won't develop this area and put an end to our racing tradition. Your racing tradition that started up all of 3 years ago, you mean? You'd really kill people just to keep doing your dumb street races? Don't call them dumb, Krebs sputtered. It takes a lot of skill. Yeah, so does making me a Whopper at Burger King. I like double lettuce, no tomato. That doesn't mean they deserve trophies or acclaim. See here now, Krebs said. Racing is a noble tradition that dates back to the earliest days of the internal combustion engine. Men have sweated, bled, and died on the sacred track. For what? So a redneck in a jumpsuit can take $1 million endorsement deal for turning left, while you scamper and scrape for whatever scraps you can get? I have over 1 million YouTube subscribers, he sputtered. And they pay you how much for each subscription again, or do you pay them so they don't have to watch? Krebs howled, chanting a spell and then taking a big puff on his vape. He spewed a cloud of noxious gas, magically enhanced to expand the room. Ember, blinded, did all she knew to do. She let the spear fly, crackling across the room. Krebs howled again, this time in agony. She heard a heavy thump as she doffed her shirt and wrapped it around her nose and mouth. Coughing, Ember moved past the still form of Krebs. His eyes rolled back in his head. A line of foaming drool slithered down his chin. "Nightly night," Ember said, patting his cheek before she continued on past him. She opened windows to clear away the toxic smoke before heading down into the basement. Ember found Ash there, chained to the wall with a gas mask over her face. Ember raced to her side and pulled the mask away. Ash spit out a wad of cloth and gasped as Ember moved to release her. "Thanks, it was getting hard to breathe," Ash said. "Jerk knew that if I couldn't speak or move my hands, I couldn't use magic." "He's a warlock," Ember said. "For real? I thought he was just a poser." "He has enough magic to be dangerous, mostly to himself." Ember set Ash free and helped her sit on a nearby stool. "How did you end up with Krebs anyway? And why didn't you contact me?" Ash sighed. "I was looking for a grimoire Krebs was supposed to have, the Libra's Eternum. When I hooked up with him, I found out about his plan to poison Olbermann with the Death's Head fungus, and figured I'd better stick around to make sure it didn't go off. I failed, though." Ash held her head in her hands. "I should have asked for help. I didn't know Krebs was playing me until it was too late. By then, he was so paranoid he'd smashed my phone, and I had to keep up the ruse 24/7 or he'd have caught me. I was on damage control, you know." Ember sighed. "What's important is you're safe, and you're not a killer." Ash cocked an eyebrow. "How did you figure out Krebs was the killer anyway?" Ember dug out the calendar scrap and grinned. "Krebs lead sled, I just didn't know the hot rod jargon. Now come on. Cedric should be recovered by now." "Just a minute. Since we're in the basement, I want to check here for the Libras. It's the one place I haven't been able to search." "He hasn't shown you his sex dungeon before now?" Ember asked. "Yeah, right, he wishes." Ash winked. She dug through a bookshelf, then hissed through clenched teeth. "Yes, here it is." "Why did you want that tome anyway? It's not dark magic, is it?" "Of course not. The Libras is a sort of atlas to the dimensions throughout the universe. I thought it might be a big help in finding where the hag stashed Cedric's memories." Ember smiled. "Thanks, Ash." "Anytime." They hugged tightly, then headed up top to find Cedric putting the cuffs on a drooling Krebs. Multiple counts of murder by poisoning means, when he wakes up, he'll be looking at a century before he sees daylight. Or more. Ember hugged Ash again, and they staggered out into the night air. For the first time in a while, Ember could look up at the moon and breathe a sigh of relief. Ash was safe. Ash remembered her. In that, she could take comfort. Chapter 32. Ember sat in the living room with April while Cedric finished up the lunch dishes. Ember held up a flashcard with a math equation on it written in bold black letters. "How about this one?" April's face scrunched up. "It's okay to use your fingers," Ember said. "You're still learning." April unfolded her thin fingers and counted, her lips moving silently. She lifted her blue eyes up to Ember's gaze. 4? "That's right, good job." Cedric came out of the kitchen, a towel slung over his shoulder. He leaned against the threshold to the living area, crossing his arms over his chest as he watched Ember and April working together. "What about this one?" Ember asked, holding up a new card. April peered at the card and scowled. "I don't like the ones with the X's." "Sweetie, you need to know this for second grade. You want to go on to second grade with all your friends, don't you? April sighed. Yes. Then come on, give it a try. April pursed her lips, blowing air out in an exasperated sigh. It teased a lock of her hair before subsiding. X's mean you add the second number together that many times? Yes, dear. April scowled. I don't know. It's hard. Can I go out and play? We need to get through this, April. I told your teacher we'd get you caught up on your homework. Besides, you need time for your food to settle. Munkalok snapped his gaze up to glare at Ember. She said she wants to go out and play, which... This is important, Monkeylock. If you care about her, you'll encourage April to do it. Bah, I think nothing of your stupid cards. Munkalok used April's hand to snatch the card right out of Ember's grasp. He gleefully ripped it in half and leaped to his feet, laughing as he rushed outside. Ember sighed, rubbing her temples with her thumbs. Cedric moved behind her, his strong fingers massaging her shoulders. Ember gasped, leaning her head back in the chair. Oh God, that's the spot. You're so tense. We're trying to coax a possessing entity out of a first-grade girl without traumatizing her further. You've lost your memories, and my sister is obsessed with studying that Libras to the point she barely goes outside any longer. I think that warrants some stress. Cedric massaged a hard knot of stubborn inflammation away from her neck. Ember moaned and leaned forward so he could more easily reach. It certainly does. Ash really thinks we can find my memories using that book? It's like a roadmap. Based on Etrix's background and magical orientation, Ash thinks she can extrapolate which dimensions in the multiverse the hag could have accessed. It will narrow things down some, if nothing else. Cedric went to work on her shoulders, big knuckles grinding away pain and strain. What are we going to do about April? I don't know, Ember said. We need to get her to shut the door that allows Munkalok access to her mind and body. But she doesn't think he's a bad guy. He might not even think he is either, but it's not healthy for that girl to grow up with a spirit sharing her head. No, it's not. Cedric's voice grew husky. I know you'll figure it out, Ember. You're a brilliant woman. Ember looked up toward Cedric as his touch grew more sensual. Her eyes half-lidded. She lifted her lips toward his as he leaned in for a kiss. Cedric took her breath away with a kiss so passionate she could taste all the repressed feelings they'd both endured. Ember exulted in his familiar taste, ran her fingers through his soft, wavy hair. Hey, witch! Ember and Cedric broke apart as April ran back inside, wearing Munkalok's devious expression. Your hotter sister is here, looking crazy as all heck. You might want to see what she wants. Cedric glared. Hotter sister? Let it go, dear. He's trying to get a rise out of you. Ember moved to the door and peered outside. Ash stood in the lawn, spreading white powder in a circle about herself. What is she doing? As Ember exited the house and approached Ash, she noticed how filthy her sister's garb truly was. It was as if Ash had gotten wet and then rolled around in the dirt. Her hair matted against her scalp added to the generally haphazard image she presented. Ember, I did it. I found out how to use the Libras to open gates to other dimensions. Cedric's memories are as good as found. Slow down, Ash. Remember what happened the last time you went off all Lone Ranger and did something half-cocked? Ah, it'll be fine. I did it once already. You what? Ember was aghast. You went to another dimension? I thought that was supposed to be crazy dangerous. I'm a crazy good witch, Ash said with a wink. And so are you. We can do this, Ember. Ember's hand flew in front of her mouth. The fairy death's head caps. It was all over the basement where Krebs held you hostage. I think you got dosed, sis. Nah, no way, Ash said. She completed the sand circle and clapped her hands together. Now, watch this. Ember felt the gathering of eldritch forces and cried out. No, Ash, wait. The white circle lit up so brightly Ember had to shield her eyes with her forearm. As it faded into a dull glow, Ember lowered her arm once more, blinking in the strange light. Ember gaped, looking up at a blood-red sky populated by slowly flying, enormous green reptiles with insect wings. The landscape itself was blasted and torn, jagged peaks and rugged fissures running through hard, pitiless ground. A bolt of lightning crackled through the sky overhead. Green lightning. "Ash, what have you done?" Ember sputtered. "Where have you brought us? Where are we?" Ember turned to grab an apparently dazed Ash and shake her. "What have you done, Ash? What have you done?"